Welcome to BizEd Made Simple. This video is a long one. It's covering everything you need to know for Cambridge IGCSE Unit 4 Operations Management. Now I've got chapters so you can skip through in the sections, but I recommend you grab your syllabus, sit back and relax and just watch all of it. By the end of it, you'll know everything you need to know to ace your IGCSE business exam. Welcome to BizEd Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at 4.1.1, the production process, and we're going to be covering everything that you can see on my screen there. Let's get into it. So, production process, first of all. What do we mean by production? Well, this is to do with the factors of production. It's the process of combining land, labor, capital, enterprise to produce goods or services that satisfy the customer wants. So it's making things. That's essentially what we're looking at. Now, productivity is something different. What do we mean by productivity? Well, it's a measure of efficiency, the output produced per unit used. Now, all of this is quite confusing, I know, and I've got an equation on the screen there. Labor productivity, total output divided by number of employees. You need to learn that one. But what does all that mean? Let's explain it then. Let's get into it. So the concept of productivity. We're going to have a look at two characters. We're going to have a look at John and we're going to have a look at Steve. Silly story as ever. So John, really hard worker. He's studying for his IGCSEs. Oh, went the wrong way. He's studying for his IGCSEs and he puts in 1,000 hours of study time. He makes handwritten revision cards, 200 of those. He really works. Then we've got lazy old Steve over here who plays around, and he does about, in total, 20 hours of revision, drives his teacher and his parents mad probably, and he makes 0 handwritten revision cards. What he does do is he plays around on the GPTs and my website and he watches a few of my videos along the way. So if you think about these two characters, which one would you like to employ when they grow up? Which one would be good to employ and which one would be a pain to employ? Well, you're probably thinking, John, what a great person to employ in a business, and Steve, no way. But hang on a minute. What about if I then added in the IGCSE exam, when the full results came out, John got an A star, but actually, so did Steve. Steve got an A star as well. Now, has that changed your opinion? Well, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe you say, well, no, I like the hard-working one. But the sad reality is, for most businesses, they don't really, and just like the IGCSE exam, they don't actually care about effort. They care about what you produce. What is the outcome in the end of it? Now, if we look at the two of them here, they've both, in their objective of studying for the IGCSE exam, they've got the same output. John's got an A star and Steve has got an A star. Now, if we look at the two, Steve is actually far more productive. He produced the same output in 20 hours that took John 1,000 hours. Now, if you're a business having to pay for those hours, it would cost you far more to pay for John. You'd have to pay him 1,000 hours of work, where you'd only have to pay Steve 20 hours, and you get the same output. So in fact, businesses are all pretty obsessed about productivity. In this case, both are good, but Steve is actually better in terms of productivity. Silly story. Right, let's get into it in real terms then. So we said there's an equation, labor productivity. There are a number, but in IGCSE currently, they just want you to know this one. We look at labor productivity, total output divided by number of employees. So if we have two car factories on my screen, you've already got the answer at the bottom, but two car factories, we're looking at productivity. Well, car factory A produces 1,000 cars in a year. The per year is really important. They might trick you in questions. If this is per year, if this was 1,000 in half a year and this one was in a year, you'd have to put them in the same time frame. But mine's simple, both in a year. So factory A produces 1,000 cars, factory B produces 1,000 cars. Well, if we look at the worker, the labor being worker, productivity, how is that? Well, they both produce the same amount of cars. But if I then told you that factory A has 100 workers and factory B has 1,000 workers, well, actually, there is a difference between these two companies, these factories, of labor productivity. If we put it in the equation, we see that labor productivity, the total output, 1,000 divided by 100, well, each worker, therefore, in factory A produces 10 cars in a year. They're working pretty well. Whereas in factory B, 1,000 workers, 1,000 cars, each worker only produces 1 car per year. The labour productivity is much higher in Factory A. They're far better workers, and Factory A is the one you'd want to be running there if all things were similar, because of course they could be different cars, bigger cars, better cars, all of those things. Very simplistic example. Okay, let's go on. Why is efficiency efficient? And then we talk about productivity at IGCSE almost interchangeably. But we would say in the example of the two people there, the one who only did 20 hours of study, his study was obviously very efficient. Using the GPTs, watching my videos is hopefully an efficient. You get maximum output for minimum input. So why is efficiency so important? Well, first of all, fewer inputs are needed, particularly if you're working in the environmental stuff. If you are cutting down trees, it's far better to get more output from one tree than waste loads of trees. So that's one benefit of efficiency. Fewer workers are going to be needed. In that factory, you only needed 100 workers rather than 1,000, and that's going to reduce your labor costs. Therefore, if you've got less workers, you've got a consequence of being able, if you want, to pay the workers you do have even more, and you're going to have a better working atmosphere, possibly motivation. These are from textbooks here, really, and they are a little bit naughty because I feel they're almost like a consequence rather than just a point, but absolutely fine for the exams. Fourth one, and ultimately this is what all of this gains, that when you have fewer inputs, when you need to pay workers less, when you can get more the output from the same amount of workers, this leads to lower average unit costs, lower unit costs. Have a look later in the video to find about costs, but that is incredibly desirable for businesses. Okay, how do we increase efficiency then? We need to know. How do we do it? Well, there's lots of ways, but our syllabus is very clear. It wants these two main ways being discussed. It mentions these specifically. So the first is automation and technology. Now, automation is putting robots in a car factory. That's where a lot of jobs were lost previously. We had 100 workers. Now, maybe you only have 2 workers and robotics. That is going to increase efficiency because robots are going to make less mistakes. You don't need to pay them for lunch. They'll work 24 hours a day. So they're going to make more cars in a year. We can also add technology. My favorite topic, AI has exploded on the scene, and that's why there's so much talk about it, because me using AI and ChatGPT and those things, I'm able to produce far more in a shorter period of time, and businesses are very interested in that, taking away jobs. So that is increasing efficiency by automation, robotics in the past, and now things like AI coming in, technology increasing efficiency. We'll come to it in a later section in this unit as well. Secondly, how can you do it, as it say there? Labor skills. You make your workers better. If your workers are not using the right process, if they're quite slow, well, if you train them and say, look, this is the way you put it together, put this on first, then that, and you're going to do it in half the time, that's going to increase efficiency. You definitely are going to get more output as a result. And it could be the labor skills and adding in motivation. If you motivate them as well as make them more skilled, that would increase your efficiency as well. As I say, there are others. They're the 2 main ones covered in our syllabus. Now, that leads us into more specific terms of ways of increasing efficiency. Businesses talk about lean production, and they could ask you for the definition. The definition being lean production is about minimizing waste while maintaining or improving output quality. So it's about being efficient without reducing the quality. 2 main methods we need to know. Again, there are more. The book mentions SEL, for example, but we've got 2 in the syllabus we absolutely need to know. JIT and Kaizen. Let's have a look at those. So just in time, what is it? Well, it's a production method that involves reducing or virtually eliminating the need to hold inventories of raw materials or unsold inventories of the finished product. Now, if you're not sure about inventories, I've got another video. Click to that section, watch the inventory section first, because this will make a lot more sense afterwards. How it works. Well, the inventory is only delivered when needed. There's very little stock held, but it requires accurate forecasting. So instead of, if you're a car factory, keeping car tires in a warehouse nearby and ordering loads of them and having to store them, this is not having that warehouse nearby. It's just saying, hey, we need a new tires, phone up, and they come immediately. So you don't have to store them anywhere. They arrive just in time. Hey, I need those tires. They're just in time. It reduces the need to have that warehouse and that storage. Now, how is that advantageous? Well, first of all, it lowers inventory storage costs. You don't have to pay for that warehouse nearby. You can get rid of that altogether. You have less storage space needed. Your factory doesn't need to be as big. You don't have to store all the component parts or used parts. You just call for them when you need them. You've got lower risk of the stock becoming obsolete or damaged. When you keep all of those tires in the warehouse, they might get burnt down in a fire, or they might just get too old as you've ordered, and they might just become obsolete. So no longer useful, that means. But if you don't have that warehouse, you just order them as soon as you definitely need them. You're definitely going to use them. And it improves your cash flow. Of course, ordering, you do benefit from economies of scale when you order in bulk all those tires. But you are having to spend a lot of money when you order a big batch of tires, 1 million tires to sit in a warehouse. This one, you don't have to do that. You just order them bit by bit whenever you need the tires. The disadvantages: it relies heavily on the suppliers. You absolutely need the person who brings the tires to be trustworthy, because you're going to be desperately waiting for those tires. Hey, I need the tires. And if that person goes, yeah, they'll be here next week, well, then that will stop your whole production process. So you need a really good relationship with your supplier, or they can really damage it. You've got no buffer stock to meet unexpected demand. Again, have a look at the other video for buffer stock. But it means if suddenly you want more, you phone up, hey, actually there's been loads of orders of cars, I need 100 tires. They might say, we haven't got them. If you'd held them in a warehouse, you would have been able to meet that. But if you haven't got it, you're reliant on your suppliers being able to meet the extra demand. And it's very difficult to implement ultimately. You've got to be super organized, and you've got to have all of the contacts and communications. It's easier to just buy them in a lot and stick them in the warehouse and then just have them there waiting for you. This has got to be organized to say, we need them now, you're ready to go. So tricky. That's just in time. Common questions on that. Now the next one, let's have a look at Kaizen, Japanese term. And this is all about continuous improvement. It's a policy of implementing small incremental changes in order to achieve better quality or greater efficiency. And it's continuous. The word in there that's not in that definition is continuously improving these things, not just doing it once every year, but continually looking at improving your quality or your efficiency. And this approach often involves employees being asked for ideas on how to improve quality or efficiency. It's talking to the workers. So how does it work? We would have a group of workers, especially at the lower levels, that meet regularly with the boss. The boss goes round in this car factory and he says to them, not once a year, but regularly, maybe once a week, maybe every day, hey, how are you getting on? Is there any way you can do your job any better? You can work any faster? And he asks for their opinion on a daily basis, and he listens to it. There's a real focus on these continuous changes. Previously, in lots of businesses, this would happen maybe once a year, and you'd have standard levels of efficiency, and then you'd have a meeting and go, hey, that's good, and efficiency would jump up. Kaizen is always about every day going, let's be a little bit better than yesterday, so continuous improvement. The advantages of this: it improves quality and efficiency over time, not just long flat periods of keeping the efficiency the same. It's gradually improving. It engages and motivates the workers because they feel like they're being asked about this. They're going to be more motivated. So many of the motivation theories say. Have a little look on those to check against that. It encourages innovation at all levels because you're asking people who are actually working in the factory floor. Remember, the big bosses, they don't know what it's like to put a tire on a car. They've forgotten they work in a white tie. When you ask those people, they're going to give you excellent ideas, new ideas that you hadn't thought about. So you're going to have innovation. And it obviously, therefore, reduces waste because they're saying, stop using this tool. Actually, it's taking me an extra 20 minutes to put it on. If you change to this tool, I can do it in 5 minutes. So waste will be reduced. The disadvantages, though, it can be slow to produce results. You won't get one big lift because it's day to day. So you might not notice it. It takes time to do that. Also, not all suggestions are going to be useful and cost effective. You can imagine that. If you went and asked these workers every single day, there's going to be great ideas in the middle of it, but there's going to be hundreds of stupid ideas that probably won't actually help. It requires a long-term commitment from managers. They've got to go round and ask these people every day. And I'm sure they must get tired of asking the lower levels. You've got better things to do, we could say. And it works best if there is a strong team culture. If your team isn't working alongside you, if they're demotivated, if they don't really like you, they might even trip you up. So you've got to have a team that you trust if you're going to follow their suggestions. That takes us to the end of this section. I hope it helps. Any questions, write them in the comments. And as ever, don't forget to like, follow, and share. Welcome to Biz Ed Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at inventories. We're looking at why businesses hold inventories, the factors affecting how much inventory businesses hold, and the disadvantages of holding high levels of inventory. Before we get into that, we've got to look at, well, what are inventories? The definition is on my screen as always. Materials and goods held by a business and required to allow for the production of products and the supply to their customers. Now, we've got to learn it again, learn it for these exams, but what does that mean? We're going to be explaining that. So, when I think of inventories, the place I really am aware of it is when I go to a shoe shop. When I go to a shoe shop and I see a shoe I like, and I say to them, okay, nice shoe, but have you got this in a size 45? And this is where it tells me about a good shop. The good shop says, let me go and check the inventory or the stock room. They go off into the back where I imagine they've got loads of boxes like here. And if they're good, they come back and they go, here you go, do you want to try this? And I bought a 46 and a 44 as well. The worst shops for me are the ones that say, no, we've only got the ones that are on display. They are the shops that don't hold inventories, and that upsets me already. I don't recommend them and I don't go back to them. That's giving us a hint with that first bullet point, why businesses hold inventory. Okay, but shoe shops are of course not the only places that hold inventories. In fact, everything does. If we have a furniture factory, they're going to hold inventories, but theirs could be the raw materials. They'd need like piles of wood that they're then waiting to change into the furniture. If we looked at a car factory, well, they'd need inventories made up of component parts. It could be the wheels that they get from somewhere else, ready to fit onto their conveyor belt system of fixing up and putting together the cars. So why do businesses hold inventories? Well, across all of those, we should have 4 reasons. And there's more than that. As ever, we want to understand these things. So the first, to meet customer demand properly. If you go, just like in that shoe shop, to the shoe shop and they don't have enough inventories, well then you don't meet my demand. I'm sorry, we just sold the last pair of 45, and then they miss out on the sale and they miss out on customer loyalty and all the rest of the things that you can see here. The next reason, to prevent production stoppages. If we look at this car factory and they don't have any car tires, they run out and they say, quick, we need the tire to finish off this car to put the wheels on. They say, oh, we haven't got any, we run out. Well, that is going to stop the production process, and that's going to waste time and waste money, and you're not going to be producing any output. It's going to be very inefficient. Next, it's good to buy large inventories because you're going to benefit from economies of scale. We'll come back to that later in another video, but if we think about something called purchasing economies of scale, if you just buy, let's say the car company, they buy just 4 wheels, I said 1, but then if they buy just 4 wheels, then the price, the unit cost of the 4 wheels are going to be quite expensive. If they buy 4,000 wheels, then they're going to get a discount. The unit cost, let's say they bought the 4 wheels for a total cost of €100. If they bought 4,000, it would obviously cost more money, but as a unit cost, you might get each individual set of wheels, the 4 wheels, you could negotiate them down with purchasing power down to €80 per 4 wheels instead. So if you buy in bulk, you're going to have more negotiating power and you can benefit from that economies of scale. There are other economies of scale you can get, but we'll do that in another video. The next, it allows you to prepare for seasonal or unexpected demand increases. That shop that doesn't have, the shoe shop that doesn't have the inventory, okay, it's doing really well, but then let's imagine that their own brand shoe in that shop, Ronaldo the footballer, goes out and wears those shoes and it hits social media, suddenly there'd be a flood of interest saying, hey, we want to buy those shoes, we'll pay loads of money. And the shop would say, we don't have any, I'm really sorry, we don't have any left over. If you had a big supply of inventories, you'd be able to meet that demand and even charge higher prices. So you wouldn't miss the opportunity. Okay, on to the next one. the factors that influence the amount of inventories held, all very common questions. You'll see this a lot. So the first thing is, well, how much should you hold? We just said, well, it would be brilliant then in that shoe shop if they just held millions of shoes. Well, it's not quite that simple. What will affect how much you should hold? Firstly, the type of product. If we look at this fish market, well, is it sensible to hold massive amount of fish in your inventory? Have a separate room with all of your fish in and say, well, we don't need to buy fish for the next year. Well, that's ridiculous because the fish is perishable. You can hold that fish hopefully for a day, I don't know how long, but a day, but after that it would go rotten. I don't know how long fish last, but after that it would go rotten and you don't want to be keeping that. So if you're buying fish, you'd have to keep turning over that inventory a lot. If you were buying something that wasn't perishable, like a block of wood, then you could get larger quantities because you wouldn't expect it to get broken down or be unusable. The second, the supplier reliability and lead time. A term we'll come back to there, lead time. But okay, if this guy was your delivery guy, that you normally got it through this guy with his broken van, well, you'd look pretty unreliable, and therefore you'd say, well, I'm going to order in larger quantities because I don't want to have to rely on him coming on time. It takes us this term, lead time. Lead time is the time, well, there is a definition, we can look it up, but it's the time from when you order it from when it arrives. Well, if it was this guy that was delivering, your lead time might be fairly long, might be 4 weeks. You order him, hey, I need that stuff, and then his van's broken and he's slow and he forgets about it, and it takes 4 weeks to arrive on your doorstep. If you had some superhuman, really good person with a super fast car, really efficient, then the lead time might be shorter. You might be able to get it you by the end of the day, and then you wouldn't need to order as many. Next, your storage capacity and cost. Well, if we look at this, if it was a very busy high street where you had a very small shop, tiny little place, well, you might want to order loads of extra shoes, but you couldn't fit them in. That's often why those shoe shops that I don't like, they don't have big storerooms or inventories because they simply don't have the space for them. Every bit of space, they need to make sure that the customers can get in and see what they're selling. So that would affect it. Final one, well, sales trends and the demand forecasting. In businesses, we'd have people who'd be looking at it and saying, well, how many shoes or whatever do we expect to sell over the next month? That would affect how much inventory you hold. If they said, well, next month is quiet, we don't expect to sell many, well, you'd get less in your inventory. If they said it's Christmas coming up, we're going to sell loads, you'd hold more in your inventory. Okay, the other place that I always think about inventories as a teacher, and I'm sure it happens at yours, happens every school I've ever taught in, is the exercise books. Teachers have to have inventories. All teachers have a little cupboard where we hide our exercise books and we look after them like they're gold, because by the end of the year, they often aren't enough. Okay, we're going to take this into a silly story and we say, what can we do with this? Well, there's a headmaster who's listened to the first part of this video and he said, well, inventories are crucial. I don't want to have all of those problems that we saw. They're really important. I know what I'm going to do. This is my headmaster. I am going to never run out of exercise books again. I am going to spend €1 million simply on exercise books. I'm going to order them because I'm tired of teachers running out. It creates a bad image. I'm going to spend €1 million. We're going to order them in bulk. I'll get economies of scale. So he does that. He spends €1 million. Pause and think about that. Why is that such a terrible, terrible idea for a head teacher to spend €1 million on exercise books all in one go? Have a little think. Here we go. Well, €1 million would buy a heck of a lot of exercise books. So in my picture, we'd see that he orders €1 million, then you're going to have all of these trucks and more probably full to the top with exercise books. He might be smiling in my picture, but he's a bit crazy. That is going to be huge problems. What are the problems? They are the disadvantages of holding high levels of inventory. Firstly, high storage and handling costs. Where's he going to put all of these books now? He's going to have to rent out a building next door to the school. Just to keep €1 million worth of books would buy a massive amount of books. You can't just fit them in all the classrooms in the little cupboard. So he'd have to rent somewhere. He'd have to insure it, because if it's worth €1 million and it burns down, you'd want to get that money back, and therefore you'd have to pay more to your insurance company. You might even have to pay for someone to guard your extra building. That would have costs. Next problem of this situation, there's the risk of damage or theft or obsolescence. How long would it take to use 1 million exercise books? I don't know, or €1 million worth of exercise books. It could be 20 years. Well, some of them, even though they should be fairly hardy, they're going to get broken down. Rats might get in and chew them up. The paper's going to just wear down and fall apart. Or if they had dates on them, those dates would go out of date. And that would be obsolescence, and that would be money wasted if you're looking too far into the future. That's often the way with fashion. If fashion shops order large quantities, well, they can go out of fashion 2 years in advance, and then you're just left with nothing, something that you can't sell, not nothing, or struggle to sell. Finally, you've got increased opportunity cost. Have a look at Unit 1 for this one, a term you need to know. But let's say I go to that headmaster and I say, hey, my computer's just broken. Can we have a new computer? And he says, sorry, there's no money. I've just spent it all on the books. I go, what, the books? He goes, yeah, I've spent all of our money, €1 million on books, and I'm sorry, now no one can have computers anymore. I go, are you crazy? We would lose the benefit of me being able to use a computer, because he wouldn't be able to buy me a new one. So if you spend all of the money on exercise books and inventory, there'll be other things that you can't buy. That would be a problem. Fourthly, as a fourth reason, well, there'd be greater risk of waste. If you've got €1 million worth of books, then people are going to be more casual about it. You'll see it with your teachers at the start of the year when the new exercise books come in and you say, can I have a book? They go, yeah, sure. They throw them out to you. By the end of the year, when they're running out and they've only got a few less, you go, can I have an exercise book? And the teacher says to you, so show me your book, just check that it's finished. You've got a couple of lines there, because we guard it more when we've got less of them. So if you had 1 million of these, everyone would just be really wasteful with them. Okay, that has covered inventories, the 4 main questions you get asked in the exams. I hope it helps. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you on the next video. Welcome to Biz Ed Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at the main methods of production. We're going to look at exactly what they are. We're going to know the advantages and disadvantages of each of them. But then because we fully understand it, we're going to be able to recommend an appropriate method for a business situation. Now, on my screen, we've already got the definitions up there. You can look them up. We can write them down. I'm not going to read them out. They're nice and complicated. You got to remember them, but I'm more interested in understanding it. So let's get into the silly story as always, so we can fully understand what those definitions mean. We'll come back to them later on. Now, my absolute favorite way to teach this as a teacher is by getting the children role-playing. And if you are a teacher, I thoroughly recommend doing this with your class. It's the best way to do it. But I'm just, over the video, going to talk about what I do with my children. And I just did this yesterday, in fact, with my Year 11 class. So what I do is I get them arranged into 3 groups. I've got more in my class, but we'll pretend that I've got 7, as you can see on my screen. Now, I arrange the first in a row, and I call them Freddy's Factory. And then I arrange the second group, similar, and we're going to say there's 3 of them in this, and I call them Betty's Factory. And then I put one poor person on their own, and I say that's just John. Then I go about giving them instructions. I say, we're going to be making birthday cards. I have a big stack of rough paper. And I go to this group first, and I explain to this person, the first one sitting there on my sort of conveyor belt line, and I say, your job is to take this pile and to neatly fold the piece of paper in half, okay, to get us set up for a birthday card. I then say, once you've folded that over, you're going to pass it on to the second person, and that person is going to use black, and they're going to put a generic birthday cake very quickly on the front of it, just a birthday cake. Then I say it will be passed along to the third person, and they're going to open it up, and inside they're going to write happy birthday to and from. And we say you've got to be making as many as you can when I say go, but they're waiting patiently. Then I come to Betty's team, who are also lined up in 3, and I give them the exact same instructions. But I come back to that later on. So I say to the first person, you're going to be folding the paper. The second person, you're going to be drawing a birthday cake on the front. And the third person in this queue, you're going to be writing happy birthday to and from. And again, I give the idea that we're in a race and we're trying to produce as many cards. So when you've done your folding over, you get another piece and you pass it down the conveyor belt. Then poor old John. I come over to John and I say, well, you're not in a team. In fact, I want you to make a very personalised birthday card for my partner, and I tell them a little something about them. I say her name's Daniela, she's a PE teacher, and I give all of this information. I say I want you to make a really special birthday card for them. They all get a little bit excited, and I say 3, 2, 1, and the factory opens. And then off we go. They're working on that task happily. Teachers, please do it. It's really good. Okay, but just because I'm really annoying as a teacher, about halfway through the task, and you can do this for as long as you like, depending on how much paper you want to go through, but about halfway through the task, I don't do it for long, I creep over to group number 2 and I take their pencil cases and I literally hide them. They're not really noticing because they're in a race seeing what Freddie's team is doing. But I take their pencil cases and then I call them to a stop, just team number 2. The others are still working, Freddie's and John's are still working. I say, stop there, wait. Okay, and I'm really sexist at this point. I say, okay, well, I've decided that the birthday cards, they're too generic with just all in black and all just a cake. I want to make a card specially for boys. Again, very sexist. But from now on, I only want you to use blue pens because all boys like blue. And I want you, instead of a cake on the front, I want you to draw a blue football because boys like football. Again, sexist, I know, I don't believe it, I just get it to get a bit of emotion going on them. So they go, okay, yeah, no problem, they're going to get started on that. But immediately they go to get their pencil case and they look for the blue pen that they now need for drawing the football and writing happy birthday. And of course, I've pinched them. So then they're saying, where are they? And they're having to roam around the classroom, borrowing, and it slows them down. They get very upset about this. That leaves them behind. Ultimately, I give it some more time, they eventually find the pen, and then I call the activity to a stop. Now, when you do this, you're absolutely going to understand everything you need to know about these 3 methods of production. So let's have a look. What we got? Well, team number 1, Freddie's team, the F of Freddie stands for flow. Now, if you hadn't worked out already, that is a demonstration of flow manufacturing. And they made, this is real, this is from my lesson yesterday, I just took a photo, they made 16 happy birthday cards. I think there was 16 there, I counted. Have a look at them. We're going to come back to the advantages and disadvantages of those 16 in a moment. Would you like it? Are they special? How much could you charge? Be fair on them. I didn't give them long. I gave them like 5 minutes. Okay, then I come to the second group, Betty's group. The B of Betty stands for batch because, in fact, that's what I did. I made them make in batch, whereas Flo just continuously made the same card over and over again. The batch group started like that. They were making the happy birthday down here. But then I stopped them. I said, change everything, get a new pen, search for it. And then they changed. And then they made these boy cards, which were happy birthday in blue with a football on. And of course there, because of the delay in changing over the machine and getting the other pen, as it were, they only made 6 and they were very unhappy. Then we come to the third person, poor old John, who's sitting on his own. And John, called John because the J stands for job. Now, he made a very personalised birthday card, but he didn't even make that because it wasn't enough time to make a beautiful card. But it was the start. So I've said like 0.5 of a card or 0.1 of a card because he ran out of time. But we have got this happy birthday, Daniela. She's a PE teacher. We've got a little joke on there. It's more personalised. Okay, that is the 3 methods then. So the first one where they continuously make it, like the definition, that is flow methods of production. The second one was batch, where they made it in flow and then they stopped and changed and then made a different category. That was batch. And then this was job. It was a very personalized method. From that, that's everything you need to know. Now I'm going to put up this. This is almost more than A-level. If we look at this list of things, you could add more to it, you could add less to it, you could argue with it now because you say, well, I'm not sure if that's true because you should feel it and understand it. But this should give you a good understanding about the advantages and disadvantages of them. So if we run through it quickly, you can pause and read it. But the speed of production, well, job, of course, is very, very slow. It's slow to make that birthday card because it was having to listen to the instruction about the Daniela. It was having to make it personalized, think up the design and all of that. Batch, well, this is where we need to be careful in exam questions. People say it's fast. Well, that's terrible because it's faster than job, but of course it's slower than flow. So make sure in your answers you're saying relative terms, faster. And look at what they're comparing it to in the question. Don't just say, well, the book says fast. Well, compared to what? They're relative terms. But we can certainly see then, because it made 6 compared to not even 1, it's faster to produce than job. But compared to the flow, which remember made 16, it's slow. So flow is the fastest. Flexibility in meeting the order. Well, job, very, very high. You can put jokes in there, you can put pink, you can put whatever you like within it. Medium flexibility with batch. You can put the blue pen, but you have to stop and start the production process over again. And then with flow, it's very, very low. Customer satisfaction, well, think about that. We've all had this flow birthday card at some point, and it's not very special. You don't feel very loved. So satisfaction is generic. It's just, oh, I love cakes. What does that mean? You're not very satisfied. Batch, okay, kind of your grandma gives it, oh, I'm a boy, I like balls and football and blue. Okay, medium, there's a little bit of thought, so medium satisfaction. But definitely the highest satisfaction is getting this personalised birthday card. If this was a famous artist and you go, wow, that's so special. They've really thought about me and thought about my interests. Therefore, that can be reflected in the selling price. This personalised birthday card, if it was done by an artist, could be 200 euros, could be 2,000 euros. The batch, well, 1.5, 1.5 euros maybe. But lowest of all is the flow because it's a fairly generic standard mass market card. So a little bit higher for batch. The skill of the workers. Well, absolutely. Job is dependent on a skilled worker. Should be very skilled, high skill, because they need to be an artist to make this. They're making different things every time. The batch, well, medium skill. They have to do 2 different things. They have to do it in blue and then they have to do it in black. They have to change over the ink, but nothing too complicated really. But it's perhaps more skill than doing it in flow. And flow, well, lowest skill of all. You might just be folding a piece of paper over and over and over. Therefore, in terms of motivation, if we think about these 2 jobs, and you can compare it to different businesses that go on, but that would be quite a nice job, drawing birthday cards. Of course, John in this situation is quite happy doing it. It's quite artistic, particularly if you like that. So satisfaction is high. You've got creative control. Compare it all to your Maslow's hierarchy and all of those different things. You've got high autonomy over these things. So it's a nice job to do. Medium, although I wouldn't like doing it, I'd say medium to low batch. It's really boring, but you go, well, at least I can change later on to a blue pen. That's a bit of a change. And then lowest of all, flow. It's really boring. You're just doing the same thing over and over and over and over. And that's where we might have to bring in job rotation from motivation techniques. Have a look in another video. The market size, well, not a great question there, but we could fit the rough idea. It's going to be very niche, the job card. The batch is pretty large, and then the flow is very large. It's mass market making those cards, but it's pretty large as batch as well, you could argue. But as a rough idea, it's something to think about. The output produced, well, we said 1 or not even 1, so it's low for job. It was 6, literally it was 6 for batch, so medium, and then it was 16, very high for flow. That's great. What does that do to the unit cost? Have a look at the idea of unit costs in another video, but the unit costs are very high. To produce 1 birthday card, job is very high. It's medium for batch, and it's very low because you produce 16 cards in the same amount of time and cost for flow, so it's the lowest there. Startup capital needed, well, you could argue this could be fit with different businesses, you have to think about it, but pretty low for job. It could just be you need an artist. Now you might have to pay them a lot of salary, but that's not startup costs. The initial just look for a good artist, and they'd probably be using their own human tools. Then medium, now you could argue medium, you could argue the highest of them all there, depends what we're looking at. But in both of these, you might have some level of automation. You probably have robots now doing the folding, if that, and the so often startup capital is the highest if you're not using humans. And even if you are, it's probably a large conveyor belt factory system. Medium and high, you could reverse there. It depends on what the situation is. You could argue if you need a flow factory, that's high. And if you're going to swap it halfway through, you need it to be an adaptable factory, so it could be higher. Bit of something to debate there. In terms of inventory and stocks needed,
Well, lo, you know what, that paper that John used, he only needed one sheet of paper and they weren't in a rush going, quick, get me another. The flow, I was constantly just in time. They're going, give me more paper, we've got through, we've folded those. There we go. That tells you everything you need to know, even up at A level, about job, fact, batch, and flow. You should understand those ideas and therefore be able to apply it. When they give you a question, what do you think is the most suitable? Think back to that example. What were the good things and bad things about it? That's it for this video. I hope it helps. Any questions, put them in the comments below as usual.
Welcome to BizEd Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at 4.2.1 technology in the production of goods and services, and we're going to be covering everything on my screen that's there. Let's get into it. So, what do we mean by technology? Well, technology refers to tools and systems used to help businesses produce goods and deliver services more efficiently. There's a definition. We've got some examples. You can look at the pictures there. We've got AI is the explosive technology coming into business and having a big impact on efficiency and workers. Tractors, though, been there a long time. Okay, what's the difference between automation and mechanization? Well, mechanization are machines that assist workers. So, for example, a tractor still needs a human. Automation are machines that operate without human input, and therefore that worries people a lot more. We're going to come back. The difference you can see at the bottom there. Now we've got a few key terms that we're going to mention. CAD. CAD stands for Computer Aided Design. This has been around a little bit of time now. So we're looking at when we're designing cars, it used to be, or designing buildings, architects, they do it with a pencil and paper. I think it's fairly obvious we don't do that so much now. Most things like this car is going to be designed on a computer using computer software, and that would be computer aided design. If we think about it, why have we got rid, not entirely, but why have we got rid of the pen and paper? Well, doing it on the computer using things like Adobe and those sorts of things, and Canva for designing things. Why is that beneficial? Well, we've got higher accuracy. When we're doing it on a computer, we can go to the 100th of the millimeter when we're getting the designs. We can make sure everything fits together. It saves time. Now, not initially when you have to learn. If you ever tried these, I use these things quite a lot. The first few months are just terrible as you try to learn the software. But once you're up and running with it, it's definitely much faster. It supports customization. If we think about this, you design the car or whatever, or a birthday card on a computer, then you take it to your boss and your boss says, yeah, that's good, can you do it in green? Well, straight away you can do that, just a click of a button. If you're doing it with pencil and paper, you'd have to start all over again. So CAD has those benefits. Next, we're going to have CAM. Well, CAM stands for Computer Aided Manufacturing. So that's not the process of designing, that's the process of actually creating it. So it's the use of computers and controlled machinery in the production process, just like this machine we can see on my screen there. 3D printers are a great example of this that have come out of business, and actually some people have them at home as well. So they build it up from layer by layer. I haven't got one, but I know lots of people who have. So they're useful, even the 3D printer. You don't have to be a large scale business now. You can do this if you're fairly small scale, and they're very useful in the prototype small scale production. The benefits of CAM, again, we've got high level of accuracy. You can cut to the 100th of a millimeter, which a human eye couldn't do. So high level of accuracy, and reduces errors because it's a computer doing it. It doesn't get tired on a Friday afternoon or think about lunchtime. Less mistakes are made. Although we could add when mistakes are made, when they go wrong, they go massively wrong. But generally less mistakes are made. We've got faster output because the machines run quickly and continuously, they don't have a lunch break, you're going to have faster output, and it reduces your labor costs, not to much of the enjoyment of the workers perhaps in the world we're going into, but for a business you need less workers. You can get one machine that did the work of perhaps 1,000 people, so you don't need to pay those 1,000 people. Now, example of technology in services. It's all very well, that was in production of stuff, but what about in the service industry? So we've got a few examples of technology, more and more we're using it. Contactless payment, when you go to your supermarket now and you can just hover your card around, and that speeds up transactions. We can get more and more customers through the supermarket as a result of that. Self-service checkouts reduces the need for the staff in supermarkets. We've got online bookings and chatbots massively exploding this year with AI, much to people's frustration, but this is technology that businesses are trying to bring in. Mobile phone apps for banking and delivery and customer services, the online of Amazon and those sorts of things, and online shopping and eBay, all of that is technology, is completely changing the way that service industries are working, booking your restaurant online instead of having to phone up and speak to someone. What are the overall benefits of having it in the service industry? Well, it increases speed and efficiency of the service. Think of the McDonald's when you go and you pay in the little machine rather than going to the person and standing and waiting in the queue. That speeds up that process. It reduces the need for labor and lowers costs. Well, therefore, if you go to that robot, they don't need as many workers working on the till in McDonald's. So for the business, it reduces their labor costs. It improves customer convenience and satisfaction. In fact, a little aside to this, apparently I was reading that one of the reasons they have that is because now people order far more. They get embarrassed when they order 3 burgers to a person. Actually, when they go to the machine, they can just shamelessly go, yeah, I'll have 3 burgers. So it improves customers. Customers don't have to be embarrassed when they're going to that. And it also help those businesses, McDonald's, increase how much they sell. It provides 24-hour access and wider reach of services that you can go online onto Amazon and you can buy something at 3 o'clock in the morning and it could be delivered very quickly. So you can get those impulse buys that people do far more. Okay, the advantages generally then of having technology in business, well, it increases output. Generally, you output more because you're more efficient. It improves product service and quality, we would say, because of the CAD and the CAM. Generally, these are all a little bit debatable, but generally it improves service and quality. It saves long-term costs. That's where businesses like it. You have initial high costs when you have to buy the big robots and things like that. Very high initial costs, but in the long run, it should bring your costs down. After a couple of years, once you've paid for it, it's going to reduce your costs. It helps you gain competitive advantage. If you're a restaurant that doesn't have the mobile phone app to order your food, then you're going to be left behind because people are going to say, oh, it's way easier. I'll just go and order it online. I don't have to stand and wait in a queue. And it supports innovation because of this technology, because of the fact we can cut to a millimeter, 100th of a millimeter. We can do new, exciting, innovative things. So all of that gives business an advantage. What about the impact on employees? Well, it can lead to safer working conditions. They don't have to be sticking their hands into dangerous machines if they work in a factory. The robot can do that for them. We can have less physical effort. We can use the tractor to just sit and drive around and plow the fields rather than actually having to get a spade and shovel it or whatever you do in a farm. Not doing very well there. We've got opportunities for new roles for these people. So the person might be frustrated that previously just dug up the field. Now they've got a new role of using technology in some way. Okay, you might be saying, yeah, that's not much of a strength, because you're right, there's disadvantages to the employees. The first thing is job losses. That person who worked on the farm probably actually didn't retrain and learn how to use high-tech stuff. They just lost their job. So very, very stressful for people. Those that do need retraining. And maybe they don't want that. Maybe they're happy with that. Maybe they don't want to. Lots of teachers that come in with, oh, there's the new AI technology that I talk about to lots of teachers, and they hate me for it. They're going, I don't want to learn how to use ChatGPT. I've got my way of doing things, and now you're making me do all of this extra stuff. So that can create resentment and demotivation. And even if they don't lose their job, perhaps right now we're hearing about in the world of workers are constantly living in fear of losing their job. And you can relate that to motivation and Maslow. So insecurity and stress is coming out of this. That's it. That's technology you've done very quickly. I hope it helps. As ever, any questions, write them below, and don't forget to like, subscribe, follow, share, all of those things. Welcome to BizEd Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at 4.3.1 methods of sustainable production of goods and services. Now, this is actually only in the exams for 2027 and beyond. You can see all the things we're going to be covering on my screen. Let's get into it. The definitions first of all. Now, there's a lot of confusion about the use of the word sustainability. Lots of people think it's all about don't do anything bad to the environment, but it's a lot more than that. You can see the definition is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generation to meet theirs. So it's not just saying, well, let's protect the planet for the future. It's understanding that we have to look after the planet both in the future and we have to look after ourselves now. So in business, that means producing goods and services in a way, we produce the goods and services, we need goods and services, but in a way that limits harm to the environment, to society, and the economy over time. It's not just about the environment, it's about the three of those things. So let's get into a silly story to explain how that is important to businesses. Well, my silly story for this video is going to be about a company called Speed Zoom, and it makes toy cars for children aged 5 to 11 or something like that. And the CEO of this company is called Jeff. We can see it on the screen. And he's been running this company for a long time, but they get a new CEO, Verity. Now, Verity has done lots of market research and she says that we're not very sustainable as a company, Speed Zoom, and we've got an opportunity to improve our sustainability. And she's going to convince the rest of the board of directors that they need to make changes to make Speed Zoom more sustainable. Right, let's have a look at how she does this. A lot of text on my screen. We're going to look at how they weren't sustainable and how they've made it sustainable. And then we're going to see the advantages and disadvantages of doing that. So the first thing, and I'm following the syllabus points, using renewable energy. Previously, Speed Zoom was made by electricity with fossil fuels and coal. What she does is she changes the factory, she puts solar panels all over the roof, and she uses renewable energy to power the factory, along with wind energy as well. Second, using fewer resources. Previously, the toy, when it made, it had loads of little bits on it and loads of cut-offs, and the cut-off plastic that was used was just thrown away. What she's done is she's simplified to make it more sustainable. She's simplified the design to use less plastic, and she's using digital production, bit of CAD, bit of CAM, see the other units, to just reduce waste overall, using less of those damaging, harmful plastics and things. Thirdly, reusing things. Previously, the cut-offs were just thrown away, put in the bin and dumped. Now she reuses the cut-offs in production and repairs all of the parts. Any plastic that's left over, she puts it back into the production process and makes the cars out of that. Recycling. Previously, the old cars, when kids had finished them, they just threw them away into landfill. She now encourages that once children have used this, she's got a place where you can send it back to the company and then they'll recycle it and reuse it again. So a way of getting the customers not just to throw these plastic cars into landfill, but to reuse it. Developing environmentally friendly products is the next thing. Previously, they used non-biodegradable paint and glue that just didn't break down, very harmful to the environment. But now they're using more expensive but non-toxic paint that snap fits together so it doesn't need glue and all those sorts of things, much more environmentally friendly. And then the packaging as well. Previously, they used to sell online and they'd send it out in the blister pack, the bubble wrapped thing with lots of plastic inside, you click the little bubble wrap. Now, all of the packages get sent out in fully recyclable cardboard packaging and they're printed with soy-based inks and no plastics are used. So, not perfect. Sustainable isn't about being perfect. It's about, you still need to have a company because that employs people and they still need to sell toy cars. Children want toys, but it's about doing it in a way that limits the damage to the future of the planet. So she makes the company far more sustainable. What's the advantage of that? Well, if we look at it, now she's got this new sustainable toy car company. She's got a better brand image. Loads of people are going to give her positive promotion, word of mouth, and saying, oh, I like that company. They are really looking after the environment and they're sustainable. So word of mouth will spread reputation, increasing sales. She's got long-term saving costs. Now, long-term being the key there. In the start, to swap and put the solar panels on the roof and the wind turbines up, very expensive. But over time, she doesn't have to pay the high electricity bills of coal, and it will actually reduce those things. So the cost could go down in the long term. Legal compliance. Well, if any laws change in the country and get more strict, saying, hey, you can't use this type of plastic, she's already ahead of that, and that won't cost her. Of course, don't get confused though. No company is allowed to break the law of the country. They might do it, but they'll get fined. So they weren't breaking the law before, but if new laws get more severe, she won't have the cost of having to adapt because she's working above and beyond the law already. Access to funding. If she ever wants to raise money, needs to expand or something like that, it's more likely to get a grant. A government wasn't going to help out this unenvironmentally friendly and non-sustainable car company, whereas now they can go to the government and say, look, we help out the environment and people and all of these things, and the government is more likely to lend them money as a grant. Market differentiation, that can be a key part of their sales tactic now. All the other toy cars, if you imagine them lined up on the shelf, they're just toy car, toy car. She can have a big section saying, we are a sustainable toy car company. We stand out. Don't choose the other 5 ones that are there. Choose us because you get a toy car and you get one that looks after the planet. So that would make her stand out, making people more likely to choose her toy car. Employee engagement. Well, the employees, they probably feel, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but they probably feel a bit better working for a company that isn't destroying the planet. The old one, when they knew they're making plastic cars that just go into landfill. Now we've got this person who's coming in and saying we're going to look after the planet and be sustainable. The workers will be a little bit more proud and potentially more motivated because of it. But becoming sustainable is not without its drawbacks. Otherwise, every company would do it. So let's have a look at what the negatives are. Well, of course, we've got the higher short-term costs. We said when you put the solar panels, the wind turbine, that is very, very expensive. So your short-term costs are very, very high. You're probably going to have to charge a higher selling price. You can hopefully get away with it because of the market differentiation, but it's going to cost you more money to use all these biodegradable paints and things like that. And if it costs you more money, if you still want to make a profit, which obviously they do, the selling price will have to go up, and that has negatives. The staff. You'll need to train these staff now because they were used to the old way of working. Now you've got to say, don't do that with paint. Don't reuse the little cut-offs that we previously weren't using. You'll have to retrain them, and that has cost. Limited material supplies. You can't always get your recycled plastic in bulk. You're going to miss out on some of those opportunities. You might say, I want to get all of this thing, the biodegradable, but you struggle to get it in the large quantities that you need. It's going to be limited choice of suppliers who supply this. And when we've got more choice, you can negotiate prices. When there's only one person selling this recycled stuff, they're going to keep the price nice and high. Product redesign. Of course, it took time to redesign this brilliant car that I've put on this image. That took time, and time costs money. That's it for sustainable. It was a quick one. Hope it helps. Any questions, write them below. Don't forget to follow and share. Okay, in this video, we're dealing with one of the ones that people get scared of. We're dealing with costs. Now, I don't think anyone should be scared. It doesn't matter if you're nervous about maths. There actually isn't complicated maths. You just need to have confidence and break things down into its simplest form. What you do, though, need is full understanding of exactly what these key terms mean. And that's what I'm going to deal with in this little video by giving you some really silly examples and breaking it down so you can understand what's going on. I'm going to be covering fixed cost, variable cost, average cost, and total cost. And then we're going to be seeing why that is so important to a business. Now, anything with the finance section, you have to start with, like all a business, with really knowing those key terms, those definitions. I've put them on the screen, but I'm not going to just read them. That's way too boring. I'm going to try and explain them. But you can pause the video and have a read and have a think about these. But I'm going to explain what they mean. So, let's get into it. I'm going to be explaining in the form of a very silly story, as always, and I'm going to oversimplify everything. But just so we can get the gist of it. Right, Here's my silly story. In my silly story, I've got poor little Timmy. Now, Timmy has always dreamed about running a bakery. He always wanted to make bread for people. Okay, so Timmy wants a bakery. The first thing he works out is, well, I'm going to need a building then, aren't I? I'm going to need a building. If I want to make bread, I'm going to need a building where I can make and sell the bread, and I'm going to need the ingredients. Now, in my mind, let's keep it simple. We make bread from simply flour. And in fact, they're the only things I'm going to have in this story. He needs a building and he needs the ingredients of flour. So he goes off in search of these two things. In reality, of course, there's far more, but he goes off in search of the two. To get the building, he goes to see a scary-looking character called Greg, and he says, "Please, Greg, can I rent your building from you? And I will pay you some money in return for using it, and I'll turn it into a bakery." Greg says, "Okay, you can have my building, but you will have to pay me 500 euros every month. I don't care whether you're doing well, whether you're doing badly. Don't come to me for sympathy. Without fail, you will pay me 500 euros a month. And that will be renegotiated at the end of the year. But for the whole of this year, you're going to pay me 500 euros every month for using my building." Says, "Okay," nervously, and then he needs to go and find the ingredients, the flour. So he goes off and finds a farmer, John in my example, and he works out, well, this bag of flour, that's enough flour to make one loaf of bread. And John says, well, that bag of flour will cost you €1. Okay. Poor little Timmy now has to go away and do some simple maths. Now, he's nervous with his maths, but it's not complicated. He's got to use common sense here and work out what are his costs. Now, he's not going to work out his selling price. He'll come to that later. The selling price, often confused by people, but selling price means what he will sell the loaf of breads to the customers for. At the moment, though, before he can even consider what he'll sell a loaf of bread for, he has to work out what does it cost him to produce the loaf of bread. So to do that, he needs a little table or something like this, or understanding of equations, but I don't really think it's the equations that you need. I think it's an understanding of the issues. So if we look at June, what are his costs in the month of June? Well, he's got his fixed costs. Now, he knows that Greg is not messing around. Greg has told him that every month, even if he's closed, he has to pay him 500 euros. So he's got fixed costs of 500 euros. He then says, well, that's fairly easy. All right, I have to pay 500 euros. I know it's not nice, it's a lot of money, but I know I've got to pay him 500. He then needs to work out, but how much do I need to pay John each month? Or in June is this? So he sits down and he thinks, well, how much should I pay John? Do you know how much he is? Well, we don't know. I can't tell you that, because how much he pays John depends on how much he orders and how many bags of flour he orders. So it's going to vary. It depends on how many loaves of bread he produces. So we need an extra column that I've put in yellow here. It's just obvious. How many loaves of bread does he plan or has he produced? I'm going to put 100. Okay. Well, therefore, if he produces 100 loaves of bread, he cooks 100 loaves of bread, bakes 100 loaves of bread, then he's going to need 100 bags of flour. So we've got the variable cost. Well, it's going to be, how much did it cost per bag? €1 times the number of bags he bought from John. So we've got 100, not 190, 100 times 1, which is going to equal, of course, 100. Okay, so he then wants to work out, all right, well, what does it cost me in total then? I know I've got to pay Greg and I've got to pay John. How can I possibly know my total cost? Well, you're looking at this. I hope you can go, well, there's an equation there. The equation being total cost is fixed cost plus variable cost. But I'm thinking, do you need an equation? It's pretty obvious. You've got to pay Greg and you've got to pay John. So we've got 500 you've got to pay Greg and 100 you've got to pay John. So you've got a total cost of 600. We'll come back to average costs in a moment. Then let's look at June. July. Let's go to the next month. I'm just making it up as we go to show you how you can do this comfortably. Okay, well, let's say this one goes better. We'll start with how much does he produce? And he produced 200 loaves of bread. He produces 200. Okay, how much does he owe Greg? The answer? Well, it's 500 because it's fixed. Greg's not interested in his output. Greg doesn't care anything about the bakery. I don't care if you make 1,000 loaves of bread, 1,000,000 loaves of bread, or no loaves of bread. You owe me 500 this year. It is fixed. By the way, be careful though, remember, fixed can vary, it can change, because remember Greg said for the year, it doesn't mean it's that forever, but it is in the short term, and it's nothing to do with how much bread he produces. But Greg can come back a year later and says, now you need 600 in rent. But essentially, in simple terms, it's fixed in these things, but it does vary over time in a subtle way. Okay, digression. Let's go back to the variable cost then. Well, I'm hoping you've done the maths there where I was waffling on. But if we've got variable, if he makes 200 loaves of bread, he needs to buy 200 bags of flour from John. So we've got 200 times 1. I'm just going to put it in there straight away. 200. Again, the complicated maths here. How do we work this out? What are his total costs? Well, we're going to say, well, total cost is only made up of two things. It's made up of what you owe Greg, your fixed cost, and what you owe John, your variable cost. So it is 500 plus 200, leading to a total cost of 700. Now we've got this box down at the bottom. This is where, again, there's an equation, but I'm not going to deal in the equation. You can look it up yourself. But this average cost, what does that mean? Well, he wants to know, that's nice. I know in June I had total costs of 500, but I want to know how much did it in reality cost to make me one loaf of bread? Because it wasn't just the flour, I also had to pay for the rent to Greg. So to do that, he needs to know what did it cost me in total, and then divide that by the number of loaves that he made. So it would be 600, it cost me 600 to make 100 loaves. How much does it cost me to make one? 600 divided by 100, it costs him €6 to make one loaf of bread. That's going to be important. Now in this month, it cost him 700 to make 200 loaves of bread. Therefore, it's 700 divided by 200, and that is going to be €3.5 to make one loaf of bread. Now, why is this so important? Well, if we look at these numbers and we take it back to what it says in the syllabus, well, this is now really useful. Use cost data to make simple decisions, which product to produce. Well, we can look at this from the table now. He knows in June it cost him €6 to make a loaf of bread. Can he charge more than that? Is it a good idea making that loaf of bread? Maybe it's a bit stupid to do that. So how can he decide what to make? Should he make iced buns or other things other than loaves of bread? In order to make that decision, you really need to know what does it cost you to produce. So that €6 is really useful. You need to know your costs there. It can also tell him whether to continue or stop production. If he looks across this and he realizes that he can only actually ever charge €2 for a loaf of bread, well, it's time to stop with the bakery dream of bread, because you're not going to cover your costs at this rate. So it's going to help decide which products. If he discovers that if he makes croissants and his costs for making croissants are only €1 and he can sell them for 4, well then it seems like a good idea to make croissants instead of loaves of bread. Of course, the obvious one, it tells him what price to set. He can't, in June, decide to sell. It wouldn't be sensible for him to sell the loaf of bread for €1 because it costs him, he's worked out, €6 to make it, and he'd be losing €5 for each one he sold. Maybe he's happy with that loss leader pricing, but probably not very sensible. It also helps him choose suppliers. Should he go to John? John, mate, you're too expensive with your €1 a bag of flour. I'm going to look elsewhere. All of this is vital. We must understand the cost structure so we can have these conversations with Greg, with John, and we can make sure the business is meeting the objectives. That's the introduction to cost. We're going to be dealing with it more in other videos when we look at economies of scale and break even. If it doesn't make any sense, write it in the comments. Hopefully it helped. Welcome to BizEd Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at 4.4.2 economies and diseconomies of scale. Now on my slide, it's showing you everything that we're going to cover. Let's get into it. So what are economies of scale? We use it a lot in business studies and in economics. It's the factors that lead to a reduction in the average costs or unit costs as a business increases in size. And we need to know about 5 different versions of this. Now, as ever, I'm going to do it in a silly story, and this silly story is going to be about Andy. It's going to be a before and after story. Andy decided to open like a little cart, a food shack that he pushed around. We're then going to go forward, jump forward in the story to when he grew the business, he expanded, and in the end, Andy didn't just push around a food cart, he ran a massive fast food chain. We're going to look how his costs reduced as he grew in size and how potentially he had problems with diseconomies of scale. Let's get into it. So there is Andy in this slide, all rich and famous. Okay, the first one we need to look at is purchasing economies of scale. So when we went back to when he was small on the left-hand side over here, we're going to imagine that because he was so small, he only needed ever to buy one Coca-Cola at a time. Very small if it's one Coca-Cola. But one Coca-Cola, he went to a shop and he would have bought one Coca-Cola for €1, we're going to say. Now, that means his unit cost for buying Coca-Cola, it cost him €1, and he'd probably sell it for something like €1.50 to make a profit. Now, when he expands, when he's bigger, he's got a whole chain of these fast food restaurants. So, of course, he's no longer needing one bottle of Coca-Cola. He's going to need hundreds of bottles of Coca-Cola. In fact, millions of Coca-Cola. So he's going to be getting them in lorries. Now, how much would it cost him to buy 1,000,000 Cokes? If it's €1 a Coca-Cola, it would seem that it would cost him €1,000,000. But no, because now he's buying in bulk, he's buying in large quantities. He's actually got purchasing power. He doesn't have to go to his local shop. In fact, Coca-Cola, the big bosses, will probably be phoning him up, coming in to seeing him and saying, please buy our Coca-Cola. We really want you to stock it in the supermarkets. And he has got the power to say, all right, maybe I will, but I want a good price. I'm not going to pay €1 per Coke. If you want my business, I'm going to negotiate the price down. So in my story later on, he's actually able to pay 0.5, €500,000 to get 1,000,000 bottles of Coke. Do you see then? What that does is that reduces his unit cost to 50 cents, €0.5 each of his bottles of Coke. Now, the big common exam mistake that every marker looks out for is children say, oh, well, when you get bigger, it costs less. Don't do it. Of course it doesn't cost less. In the first case, it cost him €1. In the second, when he was bigger, he had to spend €500,000 on Coca-Cola. It wasn't costing him less. Of course he spent more, but it cost him less per unit. Each bottle of Coca-Cola was half the price of before. So that's what we've got in the definition at the bottom. So look out for that. It's not it costs less, it's the unit cost is less. On to the next one. So marketing economies of scale. Purchasing is, by the way, the main one that we really talk about. These are all come after it, but marketing economies of scale, what is it? Well, let's go back in the story. We're saying in the first case, when he had his small cart, he desperately wanted to put a billboard up to advertise his little cart. Don't know why, but he did. And he wanted a billboard to get marketing, to get more customers coming. And he got that billboard, he paid for it, and it cost him €1,000. Now, for him pushing a cart, that was 50% of his revenue for that year. If he had to spend $1,000, it was only a tiny small cart. So he only actually, I'm saying in my case, he had €2,000 coming in revenue a year. If he had to spend $1,000 on the billboard, that was a massive amount of the money he had, but he spent it. Now, as a fast food restaurant, you still want a billboard. So he still wanted a billboard, and a billboard still costs €1,000. But you see, if you run a fast food chain, well, that is a pathetic amount of money for him. That €1,000 is now only something like 0.1% of his revenue. So it makes the marketing much, much more affordable. As we've got the definition, marketing economies of scale occur when the cost of advertising stay the same, but it's spread across more revenue or units. This makes marketing cheaper per sale. So that's marketing economies of scale. Now on to financial economies of scale. This is going to be useful if you tie it in with the later Unit 5 stuff to understand a little bit of interest rates and how we borrow money, but let's give it a go. So back when he was small scale, he wanted to borrow 10,000 euros from a bank. He wanted to borrow it for a year. So he goes to the bank and he says, can I borrow 10,000 euros? They say, sure, but we want 20% interest. Why do they want 20% interest? Because banks aren't kind. They want to make money off you. And they're saying, well, for us to do all the paperwork, to take the risk of lending you money, we want to make 2,000 euros. So they put 20% interest on it. Okay, well, later, when he's expanded in the fast food restaurant, he also wants to borrow some money. But this time, he doesn't need to borrow 10,000. He wants to borrow 1,000,000 euros. So he goes back to, let's say it's the same bank. And the bank, he remembers the deal, well, they lend at 20% when you borrow for a year. So it would seem 20% of 1,000,000. Well, that means the bank would make off him 200,000 euros. But remember, he's now powerful, he's trustworthy in all of this. So he can now negotiate. He says, no. Before I couldn't negotiate. Now I'm asking for a lot. That's really greedy, 200,000. I'm not paying that. I'm not paying 20% interest. He says, no to that, no to that. So he renegotiates with the bank and he said, well, I want to borrow from you, but I'm not paying 20%. In fact, I think 5% is reasonable. And the bank is prepared to accept that because they still make 50,000 off lending him the money. So he would get the money borrowed at a lower rate of interest. So again, this would be financial economies of scale. As a firm grows, they're seen as less risky by the lenders, so they can borrow money at a lower rate of interest, reducing the cost of finance per euro borrowed. Again, it didn't cost him less. In the first case, he paid the bank 2,000. In the second, he paid 50,000, but it is lower per euro borrowed. On to the next one, managerial economies of scale. Well, when he was small, let's say he wanted to start expanding and he wanted to hire people. Well, who did the hiring? It was him. He had to do that job himself. And as he was small, he might have hired more people, he would have hired. But he wasn't an expert in hiring HR. He was good at maybe making burgers or running a restaurant, but he didn't know much about the recruitment process. He just guessed at it in a lot of ways. And therefore, pressed the wrong way, that meant that he was constantly making mistakes. He was employing people who were gonna mess up, go out, get drunk, be sick on my little slideshow. And they were making lots of problems and damaging his reputation, having to give refunds, and this was costing his money because he couldn't really recruit the best of the best. Now, once he's bigger, he can get an expert in HR recruitment. He can get someone who's got a degree in psychology, the very best of the best, because he can afford to do that now because he's recruiting people regularly and it's worthwhile. Once he does that, he therefore will have less dodgy people recruited. He will get this perfect staff force in an ideal world, and efficiency will go up. Once he does that, he's going to be saving money. So that would be managerial economies of scale. Large businesses can afford to hire specialist managers, improving efficiency and reducing costs per unit again. On to the final of the 5 economies of scale, we're on technical economies of scale. Well, back when he was small scale, when people came, I've pressed it again the wrong way, when people came to him, then he said, sorry, I only accept cash. And he used a calculator and a pencil. And they were like, don't you accept card? Can't I pay on an app? And he was like, I can't do that. I can't afford those things. It's pencil and paper and cash only. All those things cost a lot of money. Once he gets bigger, though, of course, he doesn't have to just say cash only. He can get tills with electronic, and he can even get applications where people can buy it online and deliver it online. Payment through app means he can get to far more customers at a lower cost. So cost saving achieved when businesses use more advanced equipment and technology, increasing efficiency, reducing average cost per unit. He was slow to serve people with his calculator. He can process far more people in a shorter amount of time, reducing his cost. They are the 5 economies of scale. But finally, what about diseconomies of scale? It was good when he got bigger, but it wasn't without its problems. So now we're looking at what happens in a diseconomy of scale. It's an increase in the average cost per unit when a business becomes too large and inefficient. It's not all perfect. So what are some of the problems he's going to see once he was running this fast food chain? He's going to have poor communication. Before, if he had one worker, he would know their name, he would talk to them face to face. Now when he's talking to all of his team across various restaurants around the country, he's going to mess up, he's going to have to do it over the phone, sometimes through WhatsApp. And there's going to be more communication barriers from Unit 2 coming in and more mistakes being made. Mistakes cost money. He also is going to have less commitment or loyalty from his employees. When he worked on his own with his one employee, he would know them, he would know their birthday, he would ask, how are you doing today? Now there's going to be some employees in large scale he's never met, and when they feel alienated from him, they're going to be demotivated. They're going to like, stuff this boss, I don't care about him, and they're going to be higher staff turnover, which costs money again, increasing costs. There's also going to be weaker coordination. When he was on that stall with his one employee, he could check and make sure everything was always served in the same way. He said, John, I noticed the last drink, you didn't fill it right to the top. Can you make sure you always fill it to the top? Once he's not there in these restaurants, because they're spread across all over the country, he can't watch everything being served, and we're going to have really inconsistent things unless he fights for it. Sometimes they're going to be filling a drink to the line, sometimes to the top of the glass, sometimes it's going to be spilling over the top of the glass, and it's going to be very difficult for him to keep that standard. And all of those inaccuracies are going to create customer complaints, errors, and cost him money. Finally, almost a bit similar here, lack of control will also be there, because when he was working with his one employee, he could watch him and he could say, well, make sure you're doing this well, make sure you tidy this, wash this up afterwards. Once he is not on site in these different places, he's having to trust them a lot more and trust his subordinates. And as a result, sometimes that's going to go wrong. You're going to have some dirty kitchens out there because he hasn't even walked into the kitchen in the last month. Lack of control creates problems, creates customer complaints, and customer complaints cost money. That's it for economies and diseconomies of scale. As ever, any questions, write them in the comments. Don't forget to like, follow, and share. See you on the next video. Okay, in this video, we're going to be going through a topic that scares so many people. We're dealing with break even. I'm going to break it down into its simplest form with a really silly story, but trust me, if you can follow along with this, it's going to tell you everything you need to fully understand the topic and be ready to smash any question that comes up in the exam. You can see from my screen, I'm going to be covering the concept of break even, what it is, how to calculate break even in the simple method, then how to draw it as a chart, how to interpret the chart, how to change the chart, and the advantages and the limitations of break even. They're all the common questions that you get asked about break even. So let's dive into it. Now, before we get going though, so many people get confused because they haven't got the basic understanding of the key terms. So I really urge you to go back and watch the other video up here where I go through fixed costs, variable costs, and average costs. It's also going to be useful because I'm going to be continuing on the bizarre story that I told about Timmy. So go back and have a watch of it. Now, I'm going to take over that story. So Timmy was running this baker's and he got himself with his rent from a scary looking character called Greg, where he has to pay 500 euros every month for rent, and he gets the only ingredients, overly simplified my example, but he's only got the variable costs of buying flour, and he buys them from Farmer John at €1 a bag, and he needs one bag for each loaf that he builds. Now I'm going to add someone new, and it's going to get more bizarre. I'm going to add his grandma into this story. Now, his grandma hears about Timmy running this bakery, and she hears that he's got himself in debt or continuous ongoing arrangements with both Greg and John, and she is scared because she knows Timmy isn't that bright. He loves bread, but he's not too good at managing and organizing himself. And Greg and John are not to be messed with. So she decides to go and see little Timmy because she's an expert, coincidentally, in IGCSE and A-level business studies, and she's going to take him through everything he needs to know about this. So, how bizarre. She goes and sees him, and she just sees, first of all, let's work out how you're getting on with stuff. And she sees that he's already made a decision. He's made a decision, and he's got in the window loaves of bread, €2 each. And she goes, but Timmy, how did you decide on €2? Oh, well, I know because I looked at my costs and I looked at my variable costs. And she goes, okay, well, how many loaves of bread do you need to sell a month in order to cover your total cost? And he goes, well, that's easy, isn't it? Because I know that I'm selling it for €2 and I've got a variable cost. The flour only cost me £1. So I'm going to make a profit. And she goes, no, Timmy, you're confused. Because think about it. You've also got to pay back your fixed cost to Greg. He goes, oh, that's complicated. Yeah, I didn't think of that. And she goes, yes, you've got to understand something called break even. He goes, what? Never heard of it. She goes, oh, God. What does the concept even mean? He says, well, you know, I like to go to play bingo. She says, yeah. Okay, well, when I go to play bingo, if I took with me €10 to play bingo, and I played all night for 5 hours, and I came out with €10, how much profit or how much loss would I have made? And he goes, you wouldn't have made either. And she goes, you're absolutely right. Yes, I would have broken even. If I went in with €10, I won some, I lost some, but I came out with €10 at the end of it, I would have broken even. I wouldn't have made a profit, but I also wouldn't have made myself a loss and got myself in trouble. I would have just covered the costs of playing bingo, of having a nice night there. That idea is really important for you, Timmy. You must break even, because if you can't cover your total costs that you owe to John and Greg, Greg's a brutal guy. He's going to be coming with a baseball bat and putting you in all sorts of trouble. Incidentally, in my stupid story, although I'm making it silly about baseball bats, actually in real times, you're going to be taking these debts probably with banks, and they're not forgiving either. But they're not going to hit you with a baseball bat, but they are uncomfortable. You should be aware of having debts that you have to get paid. This is the risk of business. But anyway, let's go back into my silly story. He goes, okay, well, Grandma, teach me all about this break-even stuff. And she said, well, we've got to be quick. You're already up and running and you've got yourself in debt. So first, I'm going to teach you the calculation method. Okay, he goes, what's that? Don't worry, it's not too complicated, the maths, she says. It looks it, but it's simple. You just need to remember 2 equations. Here they are. The first is, the full one, is break-even level of production equals total fixed cost divided by contribution per unit. She goes, what's contribution per unit? She goes, don't worry about it. At this point, you've just got to remember it, especially at IGCSE. You don't need to know it, but just remember it. There's an equation. It says the equation for contribution is contribution per unit is selling price minus variable cost. Timmy, can you look at the numbers you've got and can you fill in that? He goes, yes, I can do that. So the contribution is selling price. He looks at his selling price. Well, I'm selling it for €2 minus the variable cost. Well, that was the ingredients, I remember. So it's €2 minus €1. My contribution per unit, don't really know what it means, is €1. She goes, absolutely. Now put it into this bigger equation to work out your break-even level of production. He then says, okay, well, the total fixed cost, that's 500 divided by the contribution I just calculated, 100. 500 divided by 100, and that gives me 500 per month. Yes, but what does that mean, Grandma? Well, Grandma says, well, you need to produce and sell 500 loaves of bread just to cover your cost, to break even. If you make 501 loaves of bread, then that one extra is good stuff. You're going to be in profit. But if you make 499 loaves of bread, you're not going to make enough revenue, money coming in, to pay back Greg and John, and you're in trouble. But if you make exactly 500, you're safe, but you've been doing it essentially for nothing, the same way I did at that bingo. So it's a crucial number to know, this 500, but it's not what we're always aiming for. But we have to know 500 is your target, not to have your legs broken. Okay, I've remembered 500. She's going, great. Now we've got that number, I'm going to teach you a longer way of doing it, a little more detailed method, but it's going to tell you some extra information along the way. I'm going to teach you how to draw it with graphs. Timmy says, like almost, not graphs, I hate, no, we're going to do the graph method, but don't be so scared. So she moves over. Before we get started with drawing any graphs or doing anything though, Timmy, she says, I want you to just remember these two things. Incidentally, this is what I do with my children at school. I put these two things on the board. I'm kind of like this grandma in this example, aren't I? So she gets Timmy, I'm going to continue in this ridiculous role. She gets Timmy and she says, remember these two things. He says, I don't understand what they are. Don't worry about it, Timmy. Just memorize them. I want you to remember those two things. So he does so, as do you for the exam. You just remember these two things. Then when you can come to a question, you're going to just draw these down and fill them in. I'll show you how you use it. So he memorizes it and she says, great, now let's make it real. She says to Timmy, first, I want you to draw that blank table. So he draws out the table. She says, now use your numbers that you've got to fill it in. And he says, okay, but that's maths. He says, but simple maths, Timmy, come on, you can do this. Let's do a row at a time. So he said, well, what do you mean by output at the top? Well, output, she says, what is the amount that you can produce? We could have more columns, but all we're going to deal with is the output of 0. We're going to put a column which is always going to be 0, and then we're going to put a column which is the maximum amount of bread you can produce. He says, still don't get it. Well, if you produce as your work flat out, all you do is bake bread all of the time, what is the maximum amount of bread you can produce in a month? And it's important that we stay in this month time frame, not in a week, don't mix up months and weeks, but in a month, because you're paying Greg monthly. So in a month, he goes, he sits, he thinks, he said, well, I could reckon maximum I could make 800. She says, great. Add that into your table. In the top here, you're going to put your max. So he draws in red the 800. Now we're underway. And she goes, go on then, do the revenue row. He goes, no, don't know what you mean by revenue. She goes, Timmy, come on, revenue's simple. There's an equation you can remember, you can understand. But the equation is revenue is selling price times the amount sold. So for example, your selling price of each loaf of bread is €2, and you multiply that by how many you sold. And that's up here. If you don't make any bread, you can't sell any. So your selling price is 2 times 0, and therefore, if you multiply 2 by 0, you don't make any bread, your maximum, your revenue there is going to be 0. Oh, okay. Right, but what about if you make and sell 800? What would your revenue be? Well, if I make 800 and I sell them for €2 each, it's 800 times 2, correct? And that's 1,600. Good stuff, she says. We're underway. Good, we got this table. Next, going to fixed costs. He goes, oh, I know that one. I watched the other video. It doesn't matter, does it? She said, correct. It doesn't matter if your output is 0 or 800 or 10 billion. Greg is always going to be charging you the same, irrespective of how much bread you produce. So if you don't make any bread, your fixed costs to Greg are 500. If you make 800, your fixed costs are 500 again. Good, got that table. Now your variable costs. Well, your variable costs is, you know what it is per bread. If it costs you €1 per loaf in flour and you make none, it's 1 times 0, it costs you nothing, doesn't it? Because you're not going to buy anything from John if you don't make any. But if you make 800, if you go in flat out and you make 800, well, it's 800 times the 1 because you'll need 800 bags of flour, and that equals €800. Fantastic, she says. Okay, the final then row to do is your total cost, and you should know that. What do you owe in these two situations? He says, well, total cost is fixed cost plus variable, so it's 500 plus 0 here is going to equal 500, and then for the maximum it would be 500 plus 800, which is 1,300. She says, you've got it, you've got your table. Great, but what do I do with that? He said, well, now we're going to get some graph paper, but don't get scared. You're going to remember from that little thing you've already learned, we're going to try and produce our own version. They're the lines we need to go on it. So she gets the graph paper for Timmy, and Timmy sits down and goes, but what do I do with this? And he said, well, look at this table. We want to turn this table up here into this form of graph. So the first thing we need to do is work out our axes, isn't it? It goes, okay, well, this y-axis is for costs and revenue. It's for both of those things together. So what is the highest amount of money that you have on this grid? So look at here, he says, well, I've got revenue 0, 1,600, 1,300, 5. Okay, the highest I need to go up to is 1,600. Brilliant. We'll draw that as your y-axis, and it needs to be equally spaced. Goes, what do you mean? Well, look, 0, 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, because it's going to be important later on that we plot this thing accurately. So using the full space on his graph paper, he draws the y-axis on there. She goes, but just like your maths teacher said, don't forget your axes, it's got to be nice and clear. Great, he adds his label on there. Okay, the next we need to put on the x-axis, and that's units of production. What does it mean by that? Well, that, Timmy, comes from the top, doesn't it? Because we've got output when you make 0, and then we've got max output is 800. So this needs to be equally spaced to go to 800. So he draws on his line. 100, 200, 300, 400, 500. Don't forget your labels on there. So he puts his label on there. Great. Okay, now all we've got to do is plot your lines. So the first line you're going to plot, Timmy, is your revenue. But we don't worry about lines. We just plot x's and then connect these things up. It's, nope, don't get it. Timmy, you're so annoying. Don't worry, we can do it. So let's look at the revenue. When your output is 0, your revenue is 0. So output over here, find the 0. Your costs and revenue are going to be 0. So you want to put a little x over here. He puts his x in. Fantastic. Okay, but when your output is 800, your revenue is 1,600. So 800 going to 1,600, draw your other x. Great, he's got his x's. Now get your ruler, very important, a nice thin pencil, because it's going to be important later on. Join that up. He draws it with a nice straight line. Label it, well, that's your sales revenue line. Fantastic. Now we're going to draw our fixed cost line. So that's easy. I remember when my output is 0, then I can put a line for 500. He puts his x. When my output is 800, my fixed costs are 500 again. Great. Put your 2 crosses on and connect it up with a line. Hey, now we're starting to look the same thing. Now your variable cost line. So, but hang on, we didn't have a variable cost line. That's true. Grandma says, you can put it if you want, many textbooks put it, but it doesn't really do a lot, so if you don't want to, leave it off. Timmy says, I'm pretty lazy, let's leave it off then. Absolutely fine, she says. Okay, but then we do need to put your total costs onto this graph. So let's have a look. When the output is 0 up here, your total cost is 500. Add a little red cross, he adds it here. But then when your output is 800, your total cost would be 1,300. So he adds on 1,300, he reads it off and he puts a little cross there. Connect up your lines. Fantastic. We've now got the graph drawn, Grandma said. He goes, that's great, but what does any of this mean? She said, be patient. Here it is. This is going to tell us a lot of useful information. Okay, like what? Well, she said the first thing, I told you to use a thin pencil because where these lines cross is really, really important. That's going to tell you your break-even point. Really? I thought we calculate. Well, yeah, you can just calculate it, but this is going to show you it in graph form. Okay, well, that's a good idea, especially to do the calculate to check that you've drawn the graph correctly as well. All right, we'll do both. So he dots it down, and yes, we drew it correctly. Where they cross, he draws it, and he says the unit I need to produce 500 and sell 500 loaves of bread in order to cover my total costs and pay back Greg and John. She said, that's good, but this also tells you something else. You can also know the break-even in value, in money as well, because if we take the line the other way, we know that, in other words, you need to have a revenue coming in of 1,000 euros. If you don't make 1,000 euros, never mind loaves of bread, if you don't have 1,000 euros coming in, you won't be able to pay back John and Greg. Oh, okay, that's a bit new, that's useful. What else does the graph do? He says excitedly. Well, a couple of other things. It's nice visual representation. We can see that anything on this part of the graph we can label as the area of profit because we can see the sales revenue here is higher than the total cost line. So this is profit. And the further these lines go apart, if we extended it, then the more profit you're going to make. That's what we're aiming for. But we've also got another side. This is the area of loss. And that's because we can see the sales revenue, green, is less than the total cost. So this is where you don't want to be. So if you're making 100, 200, 300, 400, you're in the area of loss and you're going to have problems. You want to be going beyond the break-even point. Nice, he said. Does it do anything else? Yes. Well, you can use this graph actually now to work out your profit. How? Well, because profit is nice and simple. We've got total sales revenue and we've got our total cost. That's what this line is for. So you can pick any point on this graph from the bottom and you can just work out the difference between them and that will tell you the profit. He does it. Okay, well, let's do this one then from 800. That is your sales revenue, 800, where it's 1,600. Over here, your total cost, where it's 1,300. You can put those two things together. So when I've got 800, if I read off the graph, it's 1,600 minus the 1,300, and that would give me a profit of 300 euros. Really useful. Okay, Grandma then says, well, all of this has been good, but I'm still not happy because, Timmy, you do make a lot of mistakes. You are a bit casual with things. So I'm going to tell you about one more thing. I'm going to tell you about margin of safety. You need to know about this. He goes, what's that for? He goes, well, you need to know when you've got to be absolutely crucial and careful and when you can afford to be a little bit casual. And this is called margin of safety. The technical for this, Timmy, is margin of safety is the actual sales you make minus the break even. He goes, no, don't get anything. He says, well, okay, let's make it visual. Think about it. Right, Timmy, if you make and sell 800 loaves of bread, how many can you afford to be casual with and still not get yourself in trouble with Greg? And he goes, well, I don't know, what do you mean? I need to be careful with them all. Well, yes, you do to make a profit, but you want to be extra careful with the amount that need to go towards paying Greg and John. He says, okay, I get it. So what do we do with that? Well, we minus. So if we look at our numbers, if you make 800, you know that 500 of those are absolutely essential because they stop your legs being broken by Greg. So if we take those two things away, 800 minus the 500 equals 300. So you've got your first 500, you've got to be super careful with, monitor everything, make sure you're getting the money, make sure it's going in the till. The remaining 300 is super useful. That's all going towards your profit. But if you start dropping the money on the floor or making any mistakes, it's rubbish for your business, but it's not putting your business under threat. You'll still be able to cover your costs. I always want you to be aware of that, Timmy, so you know when to be extra careful. Great, useful. Before we go though, Grandma says to Timmy in my ridiculously long story, we need to cover the advantages, not least because if you ever do an IGCSE or A-level or IB exam, they're obsessed with asking about this, Timmy, so you should know it. What are the advantages of break-even? He said, well, I know the first one. It's pretty simple, actually. After you've explained it to me like that, it's pretty simple, and it gives me loads of information that I can read off profits and loss. He said, good. But there's some other ones that are really useful. It shows how the effect of changing prices will have, what effect that will have on your break-even point. It lets you make decisions about changing prices, how changing fixed costs will affect you, and how changing variable costs. Timmy's glazed over again. He goes, no, don't get it. What do you mean? She says, look, well, don't worry. We're going to come back to it and give it some real examples again. Now, currently, you're selling your loaves of bread for €2 each. But as a business, you're probably going to want to change that. You might want to put a 50% off. But you need to be aware how that's going to change your break even and your profits and things. And this graph can help you with that. He said, so let me show you how. Well, if we start selling bread for €1 each, Timmy, then you can either draw your whole table again, just like the way I've shown you, but you don't really need to do that. There's a quicker way. If you change your selling price, the only thing that's going to change is your revenue. So if we look back at those numbers and think about it, previously at zero output, it was 2 times 1, but now it's going to be 1 2 times 0, sorry, but now it's going to be 1 times 0, which is still 0. But if we look at the max output, previously it was 2 euros times 800, but now it's going to be 1 times 800, so we're going to have a new number in there. We're going to have 1 times 800 of 800. So either draw the whole table again if you're nervous, or just add that line in. But with that, now let's take our old graph that we already had. Remember this one, but let's add on this new revenue line. We're going to ignore the old green one. We could rub it out if we want, or we could just leave it there and ignore it. But let's add on the new crosses. So 1, 0 output 0, cross here, and then 800 over here at 800. So crossing it in over here. Let's put the crosses in. If you put those crosses in, we'll now have a new revenue line. Now, that's really useful, Timmy. We can see, was that a good idea to drop your price? Or is it a good idea to drop your price to 1 euro? We can see now on this graph, your max output, the red and the green line don't cross. Timmy says, what does that mean? Well, think about it. If they don't cross, it means that you would never break even, and it's a terrible idea. And we can see that nice and visually. He goes, wow, that is really useful. I'd best not drop my price to 2 euros. What about if I do it at 4 euros? She said, great, you can do that, but I'm not going to do it now. This video's gone on long enough. But you just put 400 in there, and you can just draw your new lines on. And the same you can do with, if your fixed costs vary, you just edit this section in the table. If you put it up to 600, you put your 600, you put your line up there. If your total costs vary because of your variable costs, if your flour gets more expensive or less expensive, it's going to change your total cost lines. And you can just plot these new lines on and see where the break-even point is. Super useful. Timmy says, yeah, I love it. I can see this is going to help me make decisions and make me successful in this bread shop. But is there anything to worry about? Are there any limitations? Grandma says, haha, I'm glad you asked. Yes, we must talk about the limitations in there. In the limitations, the first thing that we need to be aware of is that it presumes everything is sold at a desired selling price. Says, no, you've lost me. What do you mean, Grandma? She said, well, you know, in your graph, you said, what's the maximum output? And he said, 800. I could make 800. She said, but does that mean you sell 800? He goes, no, yeah, I might make 800, but quite often at the end of the day, there's bread left unsold. And when it's unsold, sometimes I even don't sell it for 2 euros. I like reduce the price just to get rid of it. And she goes, yeah, break even can't do anything with that. Doesn't understand it. He goes, yeah, that's a bit of a problem then. She says, yes, be aware it's a limitation. It also presumes, Timmy, that your fixed costs are always fixed. He goes, but they are. Yeah, well, they are at the moment because Greg has said that it's always going to be 500 every month. But he might next year change that to 600 or 800 or things like that. And this graph won't understand that. It won't get those variations. So be careful of that one. And then finally, a complex one. It assumes that all your costs are linear. She goes, what do you mean by that? Costs are linear. That sounds way too mathematical. So, well, don't stress about it. But it doesn't take into account purchasing economies of scale. So what purchasing economies of scale, what do you mean? Well, watch it in another video, Grandma says. But if we think about it, all of this is presumed that you were dealing with John, and when you bought 1 bag of flour, you bought it for 1 euro, and you bought 800 bags of flour at a cost of 1 times 800 for 800 euros. And he goes, yeah, that's what I do. And Grandma goes, no, Timmy, you can do better than that because you have purchasing power. When you're going and asking John for a lot, the farmer, you can say, well, I know I normally pay 1 euro a bag, but I'm bulk buying here and it's a big order. I don't want to pay 1 euro a bag. I'm going to order loads of them. Can you discount the price per bag? Maybe 80 cents per bag. If John's sensible, he'll let you do that because you're a big order and he wants to allow it. He goes, all right, I'm going to try that. And she goes, great, but if you try that, your break-even isn't going to understand it because that would make a non-linear line. It wouldn't be a straight line. It would confuse it, and break-even graphs can't handle that. So just be aware that break-even graphs don't take that into account. That's everything from break-even. I don't know how bizarre it got, but hopefully you got the gist of it. If you've got any questions, write them below, and a like really helps. Thanks very much. Welcome to Biz Ed Made Simple. In this video, we're looking at quality of goods and services and finding out why it's so important to businesses and how they achieve it. You can see exactly what we're going to cover on my screen, but as ever, we're going to be doing it with a silly story so you can fully understand it, and that's going to allow you to recommend and justify the all-important exam questions. Now, quality refers to the ability of a product or service to meet customer expectations and therefore fulfill its intended purposes. We've got to remember those definitions. It goes on a little bit longer, but what does that mean? Now, in order to explain this in detail, I'm going to relate it back to a previous video. Have a look up here. I really recommend you go back and watch it. It's talking about job, batch, and flow, and I show how I teach that in my lessons. But I'm going to refer to it because it's a great continuation. So in the lesson, if you go back and watch, you'll see that I created 3 factories making birthday cards. There was Freddie's that made it through flow, Betty's that made birthday cards through batch, and John who made it through job, and they created quality cards. And they all had the differences of the table, but ultimately, we said Freddie's would be producing some pretty mass-produced, cheap birthday cards. I think I said €1. Whereas John would produce personalised, high-quality cards that could be 200, unlike the little image there in the picture that was come out of the lesson. But the tendency would be to think that we only have to worry about quality if we're looking at John. And yes, that is true. John would have to worry about quality. But here's the key. Freddie, even though they're cheap, Freddie's factory would still very much have to worry about quality of his birthday cards, even though they're €1 each. And that's the example I'm going to be demonstrating in this little explanation video. So let's have a little think about this. Let's say that you wanted to buy birthday cards. Now, you're using them because you're always invited to birthday parties of the people in your class and you don't really know them. You're going every weekend, but you just want something nice and convenient that you can hand out. And you think, well, Freddie's for you is perfect because they sell boxes of 10 birthday cards for €10. So you go and buy that box. You know they're not special. You know they're just fairly generic, but you can at least take it to the birthday card. There's a time and a place for those. Now, you buy this box and you're happy with it. Then you open it. You're about to go to a birthday and you take this card out. Now, if you have a look at this birthday card, you'll see that the edges don't match up. Would you still take that to the birthday? Would you give that someone? I think your answer is going to be no, I can't give that. Now, pause a moment. What would you do in that situation? Have a little think. What would you do? I'll pause. Okay, not long. I reckon what you would do is you would be pretty angry about this. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to think about Freddie's and you go, what a waste of money. Okay, it was only cheap. That was a waste. And this one is just, I've got to throw it in the bin. I'm not going to be buying from Freddie's again. I'm also going to be telling anyone that they shouldn't be using Freddie's. If I see them and say, don't do that. The quality's low. It's cheap, but you're actually throwing your money away. You might, if you're really niggled by this, you might even send them a letter or phone them up or demand a refund, go back to the shop and say, hey, what is this? I've wasted this money. You could do all sorts of things. Now, if we think about that then, that shows that even for a fairly budget birthday card company, quality is important. It's going to create a lot of pressure. So let's reverse it because that's the way they often ask it in the exam. What's the advantage of not having poor quality, not having this card that's not folded properly? Well, the reverse of what we said. You're going to increase customer loyalty. If you get all 10, they're cheap, but you knew what you were getting and they all match, then you're going to say, well, you know what, I'll buy that again. After those 10 are gone, I'll go back. I know what I'm getting. That's good. You're going to reduce the costs, Freddie, this company. It's not going to have the complaints coming in that you have to field, that you have to give money back when it's not doing that. That costs you money. So if you're not having those quality issues, you're going to be saving money in dealing with complaints. You're going to reduce the need for advertising because what will happen is, as the customers are happy, it was exactly what we expected. It wasn't brilliant birthday cards, but it was as we expected. They're going to tell other people, and that could mean you don't have to spend so much on advertising because word of mouth would do it for you. Also, although your prices are cheap, it will allow you to maybe push them to the higher end of cheap because you know that no one's going to be coming back and complaining. All of that is still true, even if you're doing these very high-end products like an iPhone. You can push the price up even higher. So I'm doing it with a budget product, but they work throughout at any level or quality of, or not quality, any type of product, high-end or bottom end. So really important to have quality in businesses. But how do they achieve it? Well, let's have a look then. So the concept of quality control. If we go back and you've watched that video, if you remember that we had people lined up in Freddie's factory, one folded the cards, one drew the cake on the front, and the next one along drew happy birthday writing on the inside. But that process led to this badly folded, low quality card coming out. Again, you have a think, what would you do about this? And again, my lessons, I actually act this out. I do it as a complete continuation and I get a person to do this. The answer is, they usually say, well, get a person at the end. You're absolutely right. Well, in this, I'm going to have Timmy sitting at the end of my conveyor belt, and Timmy is in charge of quality control. He sits there, they pass it down the conveyor belt, and then they hand it to Timmy, and Timmy is the sort of person who's very exact, very meticulous, and he just sits there all day and he looks at every little card. Is it perfectly matched? If it is perfectly matched, he says, okay, that's free to go. If it's not, like that one we showed, well, he drops that into the recycling bin. That would be his job, controlling the quality, making sure that no low quality cards get handed out. Okay, if that's quality control, what are the advantages and disadvantages of that? Ooh, I didn't say the definition. Quality control, checking based on inspection, Timmy doing the inspection of the product or sample of products. So what are the advantages and disadvantages then? Well, ultimately, it should work if Tim is good, that it prevents defective products from reaching the customers, because he's putting them in the bin instead of it going out. It centralizes responsibility. If a bad card goes out, we can literally go back to Timmy and go, Timmy, this was your fault. If you don't sort it out, if this is happening too often, we're gonna fire you and we're gonna get someone else in. It's also pretty quick to implement. You just have to employ a Timmy. You have to put a job advert and go, Timmy, you know what you're doing, check these birthday cards. So actually fairly quick to implement, but there are disadvantages. It's wasteful. It's not lean, which you'll see. It's not efficient, which you'll see in another video. But it's not lean because think about this. If this problem, the problem was folding the card, well, this guy created the problem in position number 1. These two other people had to had to draw the cake, write on happy birthday. They were completely wasting their time because the minute he folded it incorrectly, it was only heading for the bin. And heading for the bin, that is wasteful as well. You're just throwing stuff away. So that is not a very lean process. Might be necessary quality control, but not without its flaws. Next disadvantage, it doesn't really put much responsibility on these workers. It could be you could adapt it and get Timmy to talk to them afterwards and say, hey, the problem came for you. But that's not really the full idea of quality control. So these guys go, oh, I don't worry about quality. That's Timmy's job. He'll fix it at the end. He'll put it there. So that can mean that they're getting a bit lazy, a bit casual, and a bit demotivated even because they don't really have to care about what they're producing. Just do it, fold it, pass it on. Timmy will sort everything else out. So motivation can be low there. Also, because of this low, wasteful approach, then your costs are going to go up. You've got to put Timmy in there, and Timmy's going to be throwing quite a lot of your product away because they're all being wasteful. That is high cost. So it's good. Lots of companies use it, but is there an alternative to this? Again, I'll get you to have a think. Well, let's go back to this idea. My class usually say, well, the problem is that Timmy was sitting at the end of this process. What about if we got Timmy, instead of sitting at the end, that he wasn't sat on a chair, he was standing up and looking over all of them? Well, there, you're onto something. So that's the kind of idea in this one with this quality assurance. What we're now going to have to do is not a quality control officer, but a quality assurance person. Now, he's going to be walking back and forth along the conveyor belt line, but he's really not just looking for errors after each stage, which he could do. That would still be kind of quality control-ish, and he'd probably do it. But he's really looking to be motivational. He's looking and he's saying, how are you doing this? And he's thinking about it, and he's a business spokesperson, and he's saying, guys, we need 0 defects, please. Come on, let's send you off on training courses. Let's take ownership over this. Be proud of your work. You, number 1 position. Don't you dare pass some bad quality folding thing. Come on, you can do better than this. If he gets every one of them to take ownership in it, then the quality should be assured, and you shouldn't need to throw something else away at the end, because number one wouldn't be passing on any faults, and number two, even if he did, I suppose, would say, let's send that back to number one. Come on, do this better. So everyone taking ownership. Therefore, the definition of quality assurance, a system of agreeing and meeting quality standards at each stage, 1, 2, and 3 of production, to ensure customer satisfaction. They all take ownership at each stage. Now, the advantages and disadvantages of this, well, the advantages, it builds a culture of quality. All of these are thinking about quality all the time, and that should prevent errors, saving money. Therefore, it reduces waste. We should have, I'm sure some will still end up in the bin, but there should be a lot less because everyone is taking ownership over not making errors in the first place. That is less wasteful. The argument as well, it would improve motivation. They've got a reason to really care about their folding job. It's not a great job, is it? But they're going to really think about folding that little bit more, and they'll feel trusted rather than just someone's going to watch them at the end. That person's going to go, come on, you can do better, and hopefully motivate. Maybe even try and pay them more to do it. So it could improve motivation. The disadvantages though, well, it's significant training. That this guy who's coming in, the assurance, he's going to have to train these. He's going to have to be an expert in this. He's going to have to be motivation techniques, and he's going to sit them down and say, let's look at how you could do this better. Because of the training, that's going to take time to implement. It's not just a question of employ something and fix the problem. He's going to have to continually be changing, adapting his approaches to make sure there's zero defects. And then we're also going to have some people in this factory who are resistant to change. I talk about it, this guy will be motivated folding the paper. Well, Willie, the guy said, come on, you can do this. I'm just folding the piece of paper. Don't try and big me up. He might just say, I don't believe it. I'm not buying this deal. I'm not really involved. I don't care if there's errors or not. It's not my problem. So it's not perfect. Neither system is perfect, which is why both systems exist. And both, in reality, are probably used a little bit simultaneously. They overlap. They also introduce a more of an A-level term you might have to look at as TQM, which is Total Quality Management. But that's not for this video. That's all for this one. I hope it helps. Don't forget to like and follow. And as ever, any questions, write them in the comments below. Welcome to BizEd Made Simple. We're looking at 4.6.1, the main factors which influence location decisions. We're going to be covering everything that is on my screen. Let's get into the definitions first of all. What's location all about? Well, location is about where you set up your operations. Now, your operations could be a factory, could be a shop, could be a restaurant, but it's a really big decision because it has a large effect on the success of the business. What do we mean by relocation? Well, some businesses have a factory in a certain place, but then they realize it's not working out and they have to move it somewhere else. So that would be called relocation. Now, this question, this syllabus point is really common, and they often put it in the one where you have to make a decision. They love to have it as a case study and say, should they set up the factory here or here? Which one do you think is best, and justify? In order to do that then, to get an opinion on it, silly stories are an absolute must so you can fully understand it. So I'm going to have Raj in my silly story. Raj is an expert in location, and he goes to a job interview and he has to have a pitch on saying why it's so important. A common GCSE question, as it were, IGCSE question. He said, why is location so important? He said, well, first let's deal with when it can go wrong. If you choose the wrong location, you're going to have all of these problems. I'm not going to read them all out, but you can see there, you're going to have high rent, you're going to have poor accessibility, so your customers can't get there, or your raw materials. You're going to have low sales. Essentially, your profitability will go down. He said, but if you get location right, it's an absolute win. Look at all of these bullet points. Your customers are going to be more satisfied. Your staff are going to be retained. They're going to stay longer, and you won't have such a high staff turnover. You can have a good brand image. Essentially, your costs go lower and your profitability goes up. The board of directors are happy with his pitch, and they say, okay, we'll give you a job because we've got a challenge for you. Now, the business, what do they run? Well, they are car manufacturers, which happily ties in with the syllabus point you need to know. Factors which influence the location decisions of a manufacturing business. A manufacturing business would be a car factory. Now, think about a car factory, manufacturing. This is what they look at like inside. They're probably a conveyor belt system. They're probably huge. They may have a lot of workers, or they may be fairly automated with lots of robots. But from the outside, they're going to be pretty ugly. They're probably going to pollute, and they're going to need vast amounts of space. Raj has to think about all of this. They say, now Raj, come up with a list and tell us what are all the things, the factors we need to consider when deciding where to put our car manufacturer, our car factory. Raj says, no problem. But Taj is a bit lazy. And Taj decides, I'm going to go to ChatGPT. And he gets ChatGPT to come up with a list, and he puts them in rank order. And this is what it creates. Have a look at my screen. So Raj says, look, when we're deciding location, we obviously want everything. We want it to be beautiful and large and cheap, but we can't have everything. The world isn't like that. So we have to put things in rank order. Some things are an absolute must, and other things, they're desirable, but we can get away without having them. And that's what he's done here, or ChatGPT has done here. It's put it in rank order. Now, whenever we put it in rank order, there's an opinion to be had. And I want you to look at this as we go through it and say, do you agree with it? Do you really think this one is the most important for the car manufacturing process, the plant? Or perhaps one down here is more important. Let's have a look what ChatGPT and he came up with then. He said right at the top is transport and infrastructure. If you're going to have a car factory, you have to have good roads going into it. There's no point being able to build cars if you can't actually get them out of the factory and off to the customers. So he said top number one, you have to have good road network and maybe ports and planes and airports nearby. He said that's most important. That is non-negotiable. Next, he said, you're going to have a lot of workers and you need access to labor nearby. There's no point putting it in the middle of the Sahara because you're going to need loads of workers and you won't have any workers there. So we need preferably unemployed workers looking to work in your factory, because in the car factory, you may not pay them very much. So access to labor is the next most important thing. They're nodding along, agreeing. Are you? Next, proximity to raw materials. He says you must have raw materials. You're going to use loads of iron and steel, and that's expensive to transport. So it'd be great if you had a mine nearby to you. He said that's number three. They're starting to look a bit cynical there. They said, well, okay, maybe, but that's difficult. We might run out of that. Couldn't we just bring it in on a boat? Maybe that could go further down the list, they think. But for the moment, he's got it at number three. The next, reliable utilities. He said that is crucial up there. Imagine the factory's running and you're in a place where there's often power cuts, and suddenly the power cuts, what are you going to do? The whole factory will stand still. That will cost you time and money. It will be a disaster. And they go, yeah, that's true. Actually, I think I'd put that further up the list. That's more important than rank number one, perhaps. Well, starting to drift opinions here now. Next, cost of land. He says you are going to need a lot of land, and you want room to expand if you're a car factory as you create new models. You really want that land to be cheap. We don't need the land to be beautiful. He says, in fact, beautiful land is less desirable, because if you build this car factory in a nature reserve, one that wouldn't be allowed, that would be illegal because of zoning, we're going to come to that later. But if you build it in a beautiful place where there's people with houses nearby and they look out onto your factory, they're going to start complaining. It's going to damage your brand image. So we'd actually quite like some cheap land. We would call it an area that's brownfield site, muddy or run down, would be desirable because we could get it cheap and no one would complain when we put this ugly looking car factory next to it. So cheap land, he says, at 5. They say, that's a really good point. I'd put that higher as well. He said, oh, starting to get nervous. Government incentives. He said, remember we were talking that we want some like rundown land where it's been left and it's getting a bit derelict and ugly, and maybe we've got unemployed people nearby. We don't mind that, but we're really going to be helping out the government if we regenerate that area. If we put a car factory and give jobs, then we're making that area much nicer. The government should help us out with that. They should therefore give us incentives. They should give us some money, a grant maybe, or just a tax break. Maybe they could say something like, because you're helping out, you're making this rundown area, bringing life to it, you don't have to pay tax for the next 3 years. And they said, well, we love that. Will that happen? Definitely. They said, well, why are you putting it at 6 then? Get that higher up. And they said, he's starting to feel nervous. Legal controls. He said, you need to think about these. Remember we said before about you don't want to put it in an area of outstanding natural beauty. And they said, yeah, we'll check that. We can't just pick a site on the map and then later discover that you're next to a nature reserve. You need to look at the zoning laws, the pollution laws. You might be in a place where if you emit too much CO2, the government fines you a massive amount. So look at that carefully, because we are going to release a lot of CO2 as a car factory. Then he said, least important, access to market. And they said, do we need that at all? He said, well, not really, to be fair. We build the cars. We don't need the customers of cars nearby. It would be nice, but we don't mind transporting the cars. But if you were doing something perishable, something that goes off, like if we were making fish, or not making them, but turning it into a fish pie in the secondary sector, that would be perishable and would probably be more important that we're next to the customers. But for us, that's why I put it at number 8. He said, there's my list. They said, well, is it your list or is it ChatGPT's? They think about this, they say they are good factors, but they're not happy about his order. And guess what? Taj in my story is let go. Well, have a think, pause. Which factor do you think he had in the worst place? Which would you change? They let him go in my story. But no problem. He gets another job. This time he gets a job for a chain of multinational, international gyms, loads and loads of gyms around the place. And it's got a board of directors. And he said, look, we're looking to open a new gym. What are the factors that we should consider? What will influence where we put the gym? Just like we did for the car factory. But now we're looking at a gym, which of course is a service business in the tertiary sector. Could be a restaurant. I've chosen a gym. Raj says, this is brilliant. Yeah, I'm doing this. I've done this before. This is the normal talk I give. So he goes back to his ChatGPT notes, the ones he's already got, and he puts the same thing up. Have a little look at this. And they say, okay, then Raj, tell us, what's the most important thing about our gym? And he said, well, the most important thing is that you've got infrastructure so you can get your raw materials in. They look at him and they go, raw materials? What are you talking about? We don't have raw materials. We put the gym equipment in and that's pretty much it. We deliver a few drinks. And he says, well, you need access to labor because you're going to have thousands of workers. They go, thousands of workers? We're only going to have about 20. They look at this, they go, Raj, this is terrible. This is not a suitable list at all, looking down it. Absolutely wrong. Go away and do your job properly. He goes away. That's completely the wrong list. That was suitable for manufacturing, but no good for a gym. He creates a new list. He comes back, he said, sorry about that, I got it wrong. The most important thing you now need to think about is proximity to customers. People who are going to the gym are not going to spend 2 hours to commute to your gym. It needs to have customers nearby, preferably walking distance, because people usually want to go every day and don't want to drive there. So proximity to customers is key in the success of your gym. They go, yeah, we like it. That sounds better. Accessibility and transport. The next says, not everyone is going to be able to walk there, but we need lots of people coming regularly. So we've got to have good parking facilities. We've got to have buses that can take you there. They said, yep, we agree with that. We want demographics of the area. We want the local population to fit the style of the gym. Is this a gym aimed at old people, let's say? Well, we ideally then want lots of older people living nearby to the gym. There's no point putting it in, if you're going to style it on old people, loads of young people living nearby. So we have to think about the demographics of the area to fit the gym. The rent cost and premises. Okay, well, he says this one. He says, yeah, we want it to be cheap. They go, what, do we? Do we want it to be cheap? Which is more important, cheap or close to the customer? He said, well, actually, that's why I put it at number 4. Obviously, you'd like it to be cheap, but you probably need to forego that. It's way more important that you've got customers nearby. You get cheap land building a gym, again, in the middle of the Sahara, but it'd be no good because no one would go there. Actually, if we put the gym in the center of the city, it would cost us a lot, but it would probably be worth it because you get so many customers walking and joining and all of those things. He says, so that's really low. He says, well, why'd you put it at number 4? I'd put it even lower. Okay, possibly cost of premises should go even lower. Labour supply, well, not that important. We don't have many. And the ones we do have probably wouldn't mind driving 20 or 30 minutes to work because there'd be normal workplace conditions. Next, competition. He said, this is a tricky one, something to think about. Maybe you want to think, I want to put it in a place where there are no other gyms. Okay, that sounds sensible. They say, yeah, that'd be good if there were no. He said, but there is an alternative. Some businesses like to put it where there are loads of other competitors. For the gym, you decide, but in a restaurant, perhaps, you often see that restaurants are next door to restaurants, so people can walk down the street with footfall and they can have a choice. So you should consider competition, but I don't know what you want. Maybe you want it far away for competition, or maybe you want it clustered near the competition. Well, they're pretty happy with that list, but that's not to say you should be. Again, you've got to make a decision. What do you think is the most important factor to consider when looking at that gym? The answer is, if this was a question in an IGCSE, well, we'd need to know a little bit more about the business, and you'd have to read the case study. We've just said gym. At what age is it aimed at? How much money have they got? How many people did they expect to go there? We would be looking at the case study to answer those questions with a bit more passion. Finally, though, Raj's job is nearly done, but they say one other thing before you go. Okay, we can decide those roughly within the country, but what should we use? What factors should we consider when deciding which specific country to operate in? Should we operate in India or should we operate in Norway? And he said, well, this is a bit repetitive, but okay, I'll create you a list. First one, top of the list, he says, usually we want to think about political stability. You do not want to be setting up your operations in a place that is war-torn, or that the government could come and take it off you after you've spent all of that money after 2 days. So up there, number one, he says, consider political stability. Second, labor costs. We would love to get cheap labor if we can do that. So some countries' labor you can get away with lower minimum wage than with others. So consider that. All depends on your ethics and your type of business, but it's something to consider. Your infrastructure, again, what's the infrastructure generally like in the country? Has it got big motorways and railways, high-speed rails, or is it dirt tracks, which would be very difficult to get around? Market potential you should consider, particularly with a service. Is it growing? Is the country getting richer with people getting more and more money and therefore more likely to go into your business, whatever it may be? Or is it a country where it's going through tough times and spending less? You would have to consider about the market. Is there an appetite for whatever you're selling? Government laws and incentives, like we said earlier, is the government going to like you being there? Are they going to give you tax breaks for being there? You should consider that when deciding your countries. Legal controls. Are they going to be fining you every moment because of your CO2 being released? Or are they going to go, it's all right, you can get away with dumping paint in the river? Might not help your brand image, but they will be considering those sorts of costs. Exchange rates. Are you going to be changing currencies if you go to the other country? That's a really key factor they'd need to consider, and we cover it in Unit 6. Have a look at the Unit 6 video to understand how exchange rates would influence it. And then culture and language. It's much easier to set up your operations in a country where the people speak the same language as you. If not, you're going to have communication barriers and translation issues, which will cost you to solve. That's it for location. Lots of talking in that one. Any questions, as ever, write them in the comments, and don't forget to like and share.